Hey everyone, per your requests, I'm starting Sword of Coming, chapters 311 through 320 of the previous episode. During their travels, Qian Pingyan and his two companions encounter the young demon from the haunted estate at an inn, learning of her affiliation with Unruly Saber Villa in Watercombing Nation. Upon arriving at Sword Water Villa, their request for an audience with the enigmatic ancestor Chu is initially rejected by the dismissive steward. However, a chance encounter with the young demon and her burly companion, who hold significant sway at the villa, results in them finally being invited inside as esteemed guests. During a visit to a picturesque waterfall, Qian crosses paths with a group of arrogant youths, including Wang Shanfu from Unruly Saber Villa. Her incessant mockery leads to a swift confrontation, ending with Qian easily knocking her out with a single punch. As tensions rise and Wang's guards prepare to retaliate, the legendary sword Saint Song Yuxiao abruptly intervenes, shielding Qian from a lethal arrow. Recognizing Qian's pure heart and disciplined restraint during the confrontation, Song grants him permission to practice at the waterfall and even promises him fine wine. That evening, the trio celebrates at a grand banquet hosted by Song Fengshan. To repay Qian for his precious armor pellet, Zhang Shanfeng insists on giving Qian his interest payment, a pair of magical bamboo chopsticks salvaged from their previous battle in Blusher Prefecture. Thank you. Now let's get back to the story of Sword of Coming audio series. If Qian Pingyan were to hear this, then he would most likely be astonished once again. After all, even Zhu He, who had come out of Jewel Small World as a 4th-tier martial artist, had been aware that the 9th tier was the end tier of martial arts. Of course, that was also incorrect, as both Song Chongjing and Li Er had reached the 10th tier shortly thereafter, while the 11th tier was the true pinnacle of martial arts. It also just so happened that Cui Qian's grandfather had just barely missed his chance to progress to the 11th tier. Unbeknownst to Qian Pingyan, the former Jewel Small World, now known as the Dragon Spring Prefecture, could be considered to be the most formidable and complicated place on the entirety of Eastern Treasured Vile Continent. In Yellow Court Nation, the little boy in Azure was considered to a dominant force, a 6th-tier great demon, yet in Jewel Small World, he was too scared to even go outside for fear of being smashed to death by a single punch from some random passerby. Right now, his wildest aspiration was to become powerful enough that it would take someone from Jewel Small World at least 2 punches to kill him. With that in mind, it was no wonder that the little boy in Azure was so perplexed about how Qian Pingyan had managed to live to this day. Qian Pingyan also didn't know the answer to that question. He had simply gotten by day after day, and it seemed that the gods had finally smiled upon him. In reality, in the beginning, it was because some people wanted to keep him alive, and when he had outlived his usefulness and it was time for him to die, a certain school teacher had intervened to keep him alive and tell him not to lose hope in this world. After that, a certain braggadocious swordsman had taught him how to live in this world. He hoped that Qian Pingyan could grow up quickly so that he would no longer have to be a pawn in the plans of others. However, unknown to everyone else were the hardships that Qian Pingyan had suffered during this time, all of the perils that he had to endure, and all of the difficult decisions that he had to make. Right now, he possessed a vast array of immortal treasures and even a precious sword nurturing gourd, but he still only liked to buy the cheapest wine everywhere he went. Over at the waterside pavilion near the waterfall, Qian Pingyan wasn't carrying his sword case this time. Instead, he had chosen to leave it in the courtyard as he trusted Xianxia and Zhang Shanfeng to look after it. However, that wine gourd was still strapped to his waist. When traveling the world, one shouldn't go out of their way to start trouble, but they also shouldn't fear trouble if it were to arise, and one's safety had to be prioritized above all else. Those were the mantras that Qian Pingyan abided by during his travels. Once again, Qian Pingyan stepped onto the railing of the waterside pavilion, and was just about to launch himself off the railing toward the formidable waterfall up ahead when he paused momentarily, then took a step forward to land on the stone base of the pavilion. He was worried that if he were to launch himself off the wooden railing with all his might, then it would snap under his foot. He knew that Song Yuxiao definitely wouldn't make him pay for the railing, but it would still make him look bad. He took a deep breath and dug his feet into the ground while flexing his wrists from side to side, and for this first punch, he decided that he wanted to test out the momentum with which the waterfall was crashing down, so he was only going to use 70 or 80% of his power. Thus, he took a step forward, and a resounding boom rang out over the ground. Thankfully, the sound of crashing water in the waterfall was loud enough to drown out that sound, and he launched himself at the waterfall like a speeding arrow. His fist pierced deep into the waterfall, but right as his entire arm was about to pass through the waterfall, his head and shoulder were struck by the water crashing down from above, forcing him to tilt forward before plunging straight down into the pool. The chaotic currents of the flowing water forced him to tumble through the pool in a few involuntary somersaults, following which his head poked out of the slightly more still and calm water near the waterside pavilion. From there, he slammed a palm down onto the surface of the water, launching himself toward the waterside pavilion and landing on the stone base outside the railing. His head was still ringing, and in particular, the arm that he had thrown the punch with was throbbing with pain. The most damning of all was that the bottom of the pool was riddled with jagged rocks that had landed some bruising blows to his head. Thankfully, Qian Ping'an had grown accustomed to physical punishment from his training back in the bamboo building on Downtrodden Mountain, so even though these injuries weren't exactly minor, they were largely inconsequential in his eyes. For his second punch, Qian Ping'an used 90% of his power, and he also adopted the heavy cavalry formation shattering technique that Cui Chan's grandfather had taught him. In doing so, he attempted to plunge his entire body through the waterfall, so that his fist could strike the rock wall behind it. Unfortunately, his fist was only able to just barely graze the surface of the rock wall before he was once again slammed to the bottom of the pond by the vast volumes of water crashing down from above. Upon returning to the surface and making his way back to the waterside pavilion, Qian Ping'an immediately took advantage of the aura raging inside his body like a prowling fiery dragon, taking no time to rest as he threw a third punch at the waterfall, this time using 100% of his power. On this occasion, his fist was able to crash into the cold stone wall behind the waterfall, but by that point it had become very feeble, and it most likely hadn't even been able to leave a slight mark. The qi in Qian Ping'an's dantian was churning incessantly, and he could only exhale slowly and control his breath using the techniques old man Yang had taught him. At this point, channeling the 18 stops technique had already become second nature to Qian Ping'an, and it was able to flow naturally without even requiring any attention from him. His qi quickly passed through 10 acupoints one after another. Previously it had gotten stuck between the 6th and 7th acupoints, but now it was getting stuck between the 12th and 13th acupoints, as if there was some kind of vast gulf preventing it from progressing any further. After taking a moment to collect himself, Qian Ping'an threw a fourth punch at the waterfall. He repeated this process over and over again, and after throwing about a dozen punches, he had become so shaky on his feet that he had to lean against the railing for support. In the end, he didn't resist his fatigue any longer, sitting down with his legs crossed and taking a few sips out of his wine gourd while his qi was still settling. Back home, he had looked up at the moon countless times during the course of his rigorous efforts to earn a living for himself. He had watched the moon with Lu Xianying, and with Gu Ken as well, and after looking at it for so long, he no longer felt anything at the sight of it, except during the Mid-Autumn Festival. During these 2 journeys that he had embarked on, he had witnessed the moon under all types of different settings, and he was able to appreciate its beauty again. Now that he was delivering a sword to Stalactite Mountain, he had to travel to Old Dragon City in the southernmost region of the continent, and couldn't help but wonder how captivating the moon would look atop the southern sea. A short while later, Qian Ping'an set those thoughts aside, then rose to his feet and secured his sword nurturing gourd to his waist as he began throwing his next round of punches. He told himself that he had to throw 3 consecutive punches, while using the heavy cavalry formation shattering technique. Back in the bamboo building, Cui Chan's grandfather had once said that no capable cavalry unit would be broken down by just 1 or 2 attacks, and that a relentless assault was required to wear them down over time. After being pummeled by the waterfall over and over again, Qian Ping'an was developing a clearer and clearer sense of the pain in his body. After concluding his second round of punches, Qian Ping'an laid down onto the stone base of the waterside pavilion, panting heavily. Back on Downtrodden Mountain, if Cui Chan's grandfather had only subjected Qian Ping'an to his punches, forcing him to passively accept beatings in order to refine his body and spirit, then perhaps Qian Ping'an wouldn't have had the mental fortitude to push himself beyond this point. However, he had taken it a step further by forcing Qian Ping'an to commit horrific acts of self-mutilation, and that had honed his willpower even further. One time as Qian Ping'an had been laying in a puddle of his own blood, Cui Chan's grandfather had looked down on him with a mocking sneer as he jeered. "You can't even endure this much pain, yet you want to reach the 9th or 10th tier someday? What a joke!" Qian Ping'an had wanted to hurl a torrent of abuse at the old man, but he had been too worn out to even speak. Compared with the suffering he had endured on Downtrodden Mountain, this was downright blissful. He had to ensure that his capacity for enduring pain and hardship didn't diminish as he progressed in his cultivation. With that in mind, he dragged himself to his feet, then gritted his teeth tightly as he continued his practice. 15 minutes later, the waterfall was still crashing down under the moonlight, and it seemed to be mocking Qian Ping'an for his insistence on trying to achieve an impossible feat. Qian Ping'an was floating on his back, and his eyes were wide open as he stared up at the sky. After trudging back onto the stone base of the waterside pavilion, he threw yet another punch as he roared, "Get through!" This time, his punch was so formidable that he managed to blow a huge hole into the waterfall, following which his fist crashed heavily into the rock wall, and his entire body almost passed through the waterfall, but sure enough, he was once again swatted mercilessly to the bottom of the pool, then swept away by the current. This style of training continued in a stop-start fashion late into the night, at which point, Qian Pingyan was seated on the railing of the waterside pavilion, looking like a half-drowned chicken. He feebly raised his gourd to his lips, then took a small sip of wine, upon which he immediately felt a burning sensation in his throat and his internal organs. He hurriedly set down his sword-nurturing gourd upon feeling this sensation, not daring to take another sip. In the distant Sword Water Villa, the banquet was still far from over, and the entire villa remained brightly lit as the guests drank and made merry to their heart's content. Qian Pingyan's head was cocked to the side as he stared at the seemingly invincible waterfall. For the final round of punches, Qian Pingyan had used the deity drumming technique, bounding gracefully over the water before plunging his fist through the waterfall over and over again. There was a limit to what one could subject their body to, and Qian Pingyan knew that it was time to stop. He was already utterly exhausted, and if he were to continue in this fashion, then there was a good chance that he would fall into the water in an unconscious state, only to resurface as a drowned corpse. His entire body was soaked as he made his way out of the waterside pavilion and returned to the courtyard. Even after such grueling training, he slept for less than 6 hours, and after having a rushed breakfast, he returned to the waterside pavilion the very next morning. Only at noon did he return to the courtyard, but this time Qian Pingyan had to ask Zhang Shanfeng to request a large bathtub from Sword Water Villa for him on his behalf. Steward Chu sent a reliable maidservant to fetch a bathtub before filling it with hot water, and Qian Pingyan closed the door of his room to bathe himself. Wei Bo had only bought enough medicinal ingredients from Oxhorn Mountain's cloth wrapper shop for 3 uses, and he had already used up 1 batch back in the Blusher Prefecture, so he would only have 1 batch left after this bath. On this day, Sword Water Villa was going to continue to welcome guests from all parts of the region, and the alliance leader election was only going to take place the next day, which had been picked out as an auspicious day. This gave everyone the chance to visit and interact with one another, and many people were taking advantage of this opportunity to visit old friends or establish seniors, make new acquaintances, or hold sparring matches. Hence, the entire villa was still just as lively and bustling as it had been the day before. At night, Qian Pingyan had some dinner with Xianxia and Zhang Shanfeng again, then returned to the waterfall. This time, Qian Pingyan noticed a protrusion roughly the size of a go board at the center of the pond, in front of the waterfall. For some reason, despite the countless years of flowing water it had been subjected to, the rock hadn't been shaved flat. Qian Pingyan had been struck by a burst of inspiration upon seeing the rock, and instead of only practicing his fist techniques on the waterfall, he also took some time to stand on the rock to practice his standing meditation. As the waterfall came crashing down upon him, he was eventually forced to switch from standing meditation to seated meditation, then ultimately slipped off the rock altogether and fell into the water. After several cycles of this, Qian Pingyan was able to last several minutes in standing meditation on the rock, and he gradually extended that time. In the end, he began lowering his head, extending it out of the waterfall so that his back would be subjected to more of the force crashing down from above, and in total, he was able to last almost 15 minutes. In contrast with striking the waterfall over and over again, Qian Pingyan was surprised to discover that this type of training seemed to be more beneficial. He felt as if a strong wind was blowing through his acupoints, causing them to loosen ever so slightly, thereby allowing him to channel his qi even faster than before when using the 18 stops technique. After making this discovery, Qian Pingyan was so excited that he gulped down a large mouthful of wine, but the resulting burning sensation in his stomach was so intense that he couldn't help but jump up and down, wincing in pain in the waterside pavilion. After engaging in a few more bouts of standing meditation under the waterfall, midnight had already passed, yet the commotion over at Sword Water Villa was only growing louder. Qian Pingyan returned to the courtyard after a fruitful day of training, and the bathtub was already waiting for him in his room alongside a pair of maidservants assigned by the villa. He used up the final batch of medicine in the bath and, in an extremely rare occurrence, slept all the way until noon. After enjoying a hearty meal, he left the courtyard in high spirits, nodding and smiling at the pair of maidservants outside as he passed them by, then practiced walking meditation on his way to the waterside pavilion near the waterfall. Apparently, Sword Water Villa had only been in existence for 60 or 70 years, while the waterside pavilion had been here long before that. Yet, there was a misconception that the waterside pavilion was part of the villa. While Qian Pingyan was making his way into the distance, the 2 bored maidservants began to chat quietly among themselves. One of them, a young woman with an oval face, remarked that Chan Ping'an was a very strange person, while the other responded in an amused fashion, saying that he wouldn't have caught the eye of the old villa master if he were a normal person. The oval-faced young woman then began to tease her companion, saying that even though Chan Ping'an wasn't quite as handsome as their young villa master, he was still quite good-looking, and she asked her companion whether she was into him. The other maidservant replied that after witnessing their young villa master's flair and handsome looks, she no longer had eyes for any other man. The two young women continued to chat with one another while no one else was around. To them, it was an immense stroke of fortune that they were able to stay in Sword Water Villa. Perhaps their kind-hearted mistress would arrange for them to marry some handsome young prodigy in the future, but in any case, Sword Water Villa would always be their home and their safe haven in their time of need. Upon approaching the waterside pavilion on this day, Chan Ping'an noticed that Song Yuxiao was there, seated on the long bench. He quickly made his way up the steps, then sat down across from Song Yuxiao, who withdrew his gaze from the waterfall and began to examine Chan Ping'an. He then nodded with approval as he said, "You're already getting the hang of it. This is truly some impressive progress." Chan Ping'an was very happy to hear this. "The wine brewed in my villa tastes better than the stuff you get from elsewhere, doesn't it?" Song Yuxiao asked. Chan Ping'an scratched his head as he replied, "It does, but I'm going to be conflicted now whenever I buy wine in the future." Song Yuxiao was very amused to hear this and he jibed, "Are you telling me you don't have enough money?" Chan Ping'an considered the question for a moment, then replied in a truthful manner, "No, but drinking wine doesn't seem to be beneficial to my fist technique practice, so it always feels to me like I'm wasting money. However, now that I've gotten used to drinking, it'll always feel like something's missing if my wine gourd is empty." "Why are you getting hung up over things? You're not a woman. As long as a man can afford it, they should drink the best wine that money can buy and think about everything else later," Song Yuxiao chuckled. Chan Ping'an shook his head vigorously in response. "I have to be miserly with my spending. Now that I've developed a habit of drinking, it's one that I won't be able to kick, but if I develop a habit for opulence as well, I'm going to resent myself." Song Yuxiao pointed at Chan Ping'an as he chuckled. "You're a wealthy man who's never going to be able to enjoy his wealth." A bright smile appeared on Chan Ping'an's face as he replied, "As long as I have food to eat and wine to drink for every meal, I'm already very content." Song Yuxiao was infected by Chan Ping'an's optimism and enthusiasm, and a smile appeared on his face as well as he asked, "Who's going to cook and buy wine for you?" "Even if I get a wife in the future, I'll still be cooking and buying wine for myself," Chan Ping'an replied. Song Yuxiao immediately spat onto the ground as he glared at Chan Ping'an and scolded, "Are you an idiot? You're just going to get yourself a wife, then put her on a pedestal and worship her like a bodhisattva? Do you not know that women are going to walk all over you unless you give them regular beatings?" A sheepish look appeared on Chan Ping'an's face, and he pulled out his gourd and took a small sip of wine. Beating the girl that he liked? As if she would tear him into shreds if he even dared to think about laying a finger on her. Besides, he hadn't even expressed his feelings to her yet, so who knew if she was going to be his future wife? Of course, he would be ecstatic if Ningyao could become his wife, and just the mere thought of that was enough to plaster a dumb grin across his face. Song Yuxiao shook his head with a resigned expression at the sight of Chan Ping'an's stupid expression, and he sighed, "Looks like you really are an idiot." In any case, Song Yuxiao had no interest in educating Chan Ping'an on how to treat his future wife, and a serious look appeared on his face as he declared, "In order to progress from the third to the fourth tier, you must expel the impurities in your body bit by bit. Additionally, you'll also need to start focusing on your mindset. The path that your fists take must be clear and without obstruction, and you must have the courage and determination to take down any opponent that stands before you. For swordsmen, they must achieve a clear heart and completely immerse themselves in their sword, to the point that their sword is the only thing that they need to face heaven and earth, or whatever demons and deities that come their way. Chan Ping'an, have you truly hardened your resolve?" Song Yuxiao's expression became more and more fierce as he spoke, and at the end, he was practically shooting daggers at Chan Ping'an out of his eyes. Chan Ping'an remained completely unmoved as he nodded in response. "Once I set my mind on something, I never back down." Song Yuxiao rose to his feet, and a vast surge of sword qi erupted out of his body, sweeping toward Chan Ping'an like a waterfall. "You sure make it sound easy. I don't think you're prepared at all." Chan Ping'an also rose to his feet, and his eyes were clear and bright as he said, "To be honest, I don't really understand what it means to have a clear heart and unshakable resolve. I just feel like..." Chan Ping'an turned and pointed at the nearby waterfall as he continued, "I have to punch through this waterfall and leave a mark of my fist on the rock wall behind it. In fact, I think there will come a day when I punch the waterfall so hard that it flows in reverse, so that it won't ever be able to knock me down again. Then why aren't you doing it? Do it right now. Song Yuxiao roared. Qian Pingyan immediately turned to the waterfall outside the waterside pavilion, doing so purely out of instinct, and took a few steps back, standing at the top of the staircase before adopting an ancient fist stance that Cui Chan's grandfather had never assigned a name to. Even though the sword saint of water-combing nation was standing right next to him, Qian Pingyan could no longer see him. In fact, the entire waterside pavilion had ceased to exist in his eyes, and the only thing that was focused on was his opponent, which was the waterfall standing before him. During this southbound journey, Qian Pingyan had been practicing his walking meditation as slowly as possible, going as slow as he could, but this time he was pursuing speed, as much speed as he was capable of mustering. His strides were huge, to the point that the final step that he took sent him crashing straight through the railing of the waterside pavilion. He then stepped onto the stone base outside, leaving a trail of footmarks in his wake. From there, he launched himself forward, and his fist aura was dense and formidable, as if an azure dragon was wound around his arm. His fist punched through the waterfall, and he burst through the water as his fist crashed into the rock wall, instantly shattering it and sending countless rock fragments flying in all directions. And that wasn't the end. Qian Pingyan threw one punch after another, alternating between right and left fists, pummeling the rock wall relentlessly in the true spirit of the deity drumming technique. Rock fragments and water were splatting in all directions, and so much moisture had erupted up into the air above the waterside pavilion that a resplendent rainbow appeared. Song Yuxiao was standing in the waterside pavilion with his hands clasped behind his back, and his robes were flapping audibly from the gusts of wind generated by Qian Pingyan's punches. He looked up at the vibrant rainbow up above as he chortled, "Brilliant!" This was a stunning sight to behold, considering that it was only a pure martial artist breaking through to the 4th tier, and it made Song Yuxiao feel like it was worth living a few more years, even though the current state of the world was one that he abhorred. Song Yuxiao gently patted the old sword strapped to his waist, which had sensed the immense aura erupting out of Qian Pingyan. He could tell that the sword was raring to be let out of its scabbard. A slightly forlorn look appeared on Song Yuxiao's face as he sighed. If Gao Feng were still alive, perhaps he would be the one standing here tonight. The second villa master of Sword Water Villa, Song Gaofeng, was Song Fengshan's father, and he had also been a top-rate prodigy in the way of the sword. Unfortunately, he had been weighed down by romantic affairs, and that had ultimately led to his ruin. Song Yuxiao had actually played a very big role in this tragedy, and it had always been his biggest regret. The reason for this was that Song Fengshan's mother was a mountain spirit, which was a taboo despised by humans. However, at the time, Song Yuxiao had been at the height of his powers, and he didn't care about what others thought of him. With his sword in his hand, he had reigned supreme in water-combing nation. During one of his outings, he saved a pure and kind-hearted little girl, who turned out to be a plant spirit that had attained a human form. Not only did Song Yuxiao not look down on her for this, he took her back to the villa, and over time, she and Song Gaofeng developed feelings for one another. Song Yuxiao remained true to himself, not raising any objections to this, and in the end, the two of them became husband and wife. If that had been the end of the matter, then this would have been a happy story. However, fate was often a cruel and fickle mistress. Song Gaofeng's wife had a garden that she carefully nurtured, and it was filled with abundant spiritual energy, allowing it to thrive all year round. At some point, a rumor began to spread, claiming that the plants in the garden were equivalent to miracle pills, and that consuming a single one would allow one to gain over a decade's worth of cultivation base. After that, people began stealing plants from the garden, but the kind-hearted woman simply turned a blind eye to this, allowing the thieves to do as they pleased. The villa also released a public statement, informing everyone that the plants in the garden could only extend one's lifespan slightly, but provided no benefit to one's cultivation. As time passed, everyone began to realize that this was indeed the case, and the garden was left alone. However, one day, someone picked the majority of the plants in the garden, and they still weren't satisfied after that, trampling the rest of the plants to death. The plants in the garden had no benefit to one's cultivation base, but the garden itself was the woman's Tao attainment catalyst, and its destruction sent her spiraling into a deep depression, ultimately leading to a grave illness. Song Gaofeng was able to track down the culprit, and as it turned out, it was a woman whose love for him had turned to resentment over time. Song Gaofeng had lashed out with his sword without any hesitation, but was stopped by the woman's father, the alliance leader of water-combing nation at the time, as well as a fist technique master that was renowned across several nations. On top of that, he was also a border general, so he had very extensive ties in the imperial court and was very trusted by the emperor. In reality, the title of alliance leader was one that the emperor assigned in order to place shackles onto someone. Song Gaofeng was determined to kill the culprit, but he was no match for her father. Following his return to Swordwater Villa, the woman and her father also visited to apologize, and in a display of sincerity, the alliance leader had even severed one of his own arms, standing outside the villa with the fresh wound still gushing blood. While it was true that Song Yuxiao was perfectly capable of defeating and killing the alliance leader, what could he do? Lop off the man's other arm, then decapitate his daughter? He could only let the matter slide. Throughout this entire process, Song Gaofeng remained by his wife's sickbed, and he didn't even come out to meet the woman and her father. Following their departure, Song Yuxiao informed his son of what had happened, and Song Gaofeng refused to see him as well, only telling his father that he wished to be alone. Only after everything was said and done did Song Yuxiao learn that his son had gone down a demonic path, cultivating a demonic secret scripture. Prior to making his final act, he had disfigured himself and switched to a different weapon, leaving his usual sword at home. On the day that the renowned fist technique master retired from his post as the alliance leader, Song Gaofeng had infiltrated his manor and slain the old alliance leader, albeit suffering severe injuries himself in the process. By the time he returned to the villa, he was already a spent force, and in the end, he passed away with his dying wife on the same night. At the time, Song Yuxiao had been standing by the doorway, while Song Fengshan stayed by his parents' bedside. Even though he was only a young boy back then, he didn't shed a single tear. All of the guilt that Song Yuxiao felt towards Song Gaofeng was transferred to Song Fengshan, and Song Fengshan's insistence on marrying a female spirit had torn that old wound of Song Yuxiao's wide open. He was completely disillusioned and increasingly racked with guilt, and that was why he was unwilling to intervene even after learning that Song Fengshan was colluding with the other three evil spirits of Water Combing Nation. He was no longer the same young man who stuck to his way of life at all costs, even if it meant having to kill his own grandson. Song Yuxiao was well aware of what Song Fengshan wanted to do. Even though Song Gaofeng had managed to kill the former alliance leader that night, the true culprit had gotten away with her heinous actions. After that, the emperor didn't want to make an enemy out of Swordwater Villa, but he most likely also pitted the daughter of the former alliance leader, so he served as matchmaker and introduced her to a decorated general of Water Combing Nation. In the end, they became husband and wife, and she received an honorary title for her marriage to this general. Everyone knew that Song Yuxiao played by the rules, so even though he was the sword saint of Water Combing Nation, the emperor wasn't concerned about him. As for Song Yuxiao's grandson, he had only been at a very tender age at the time of his parents' death, so everyone simply thought that he would be too young to remember the events much. Thus, all was well and peaceful in Water Combing Nation for over 2 decades, and the position of alliance leader was vacant that entire time. That was until Song Fengshan opened the doors of Swordwater Villa, inviting esteemed and prestigious figures from all parts to attend the inauguration ceremony that was going to be held the next day. Song Yuxiao no longer had any interest in worldly affairs, but that certainly didn't mean that he was completely detached from everything. Why was it that he had made so many frequent outings on his own these past years? Was it really just so he could turn a blind eye to his own grandson's actions and try to put himself in a better mood? That was most definitely not the case. Song Yuxiao knew that a day would inevitably arrive when everything came to a head, and immense pressure would come crashing down upon his cherished Swordwater Villa. Song Fengshan was going to step out of line, secretly becoming an enemy of the entire imperial court, and this inevitable eventuality weighed on Song Yuxiao's heart twofold. The first thing that weighed on his heart was his guilt toward Song Gaofeng, while the second thing was that Song Fengshan's actions went completely against the rules that he had upheld his entire life. He was hesitating about whether he should turn on the imperial court. If he were to do that, he would be directly provoking the authority of the emperor, but that wasn't a concern for him at all. What he was truly concerned about was that doing such a thing would completely go against his very way of life. Deep down, he had never approved of Song Fengshan's actions, but he couldn't tell anyone all of this. He had made his latest outing with the objective of visiting Colorful Garment Nation's sword god, whom he considered to be both a friend and rival of his. He wanted to spar with the old sword god, and wanted even more to undo these knots in his heart. Unfortunately, the old sword god had already passed away. Song Yuxiao had no choice but to turn back halfway, and that resulted in that incident in the ancient temple. Song Yuxiao was so lost in thought as he stood in the waterside pavilion that he didn't notice that Chan Ping'an was still in the waterfall. By the time he realized that something wasn't right, Chan Ping'an was already slowly making his way out of the waterfall. He leapt up and landed in the waterside pavilion, where he started bandaging his own battered and bloodied fists. Song Yuxiao cast his bothersome train of thought aside and smiled. "You've already had a taste of our villa's fine wine. Don't you think it'll taste even better now that you're a lesser grandmaster?" However, what Chan Ping'an had said next had him reeling from shock. I wasn't able to do it. I'm now able to punch through the waterfall, but there's still a line that I haven't been able to cross. Song Yuxiao examined Chan Ping'an's restrained aura, and his fist intent was as turbulent and unrelenting as a waterfall. A stunned look appeared on his face as he exclaimed, "You clearly already have what it takes to reach the 4th tier. In fact, I can say with absolute confidence that I've never seen any 3rd-tier martial artist with a foundation more solid than yours. What could possibly be missing?" A resigned look appeared on Chan Ping'an's face as he replied, "I don't know exactly what it is. All I know is that there really was something missing. However, I know the general direction. A path has been laid out beneath my feet, so I won't have to stumble around without any direction any longer. I should be able to grind it out before I get to Old Dragon City, and if I'm lucky, perhaps I'll naturally make a breakthrough once I reach the ferry station of your water-combing nation. Having said that, my luck has never been great, so it's much more likely that I'll only be making the breakthrough after arriving in Old Dragon City." Song Yuxiao clasped his hands behind his back, then walked a couple of laps around Chan Ping'an as he mused. "I thought I had already seen it all, but it seems like there's always more waiting to be seen in this world. You've truly broadened my horizons. In any case, let's go have a drink. Even though you haven't made a breakthrough, this is still worthy of celebration." Chan Ping'an shook his wine gourd around to find that it was still quite full, and he nodded with a smile in response. The hot pot served in a restaurant in the small town outside the villa is absolutely exquisite, and the wine that they serve is quite nice as well. Would you like to go and have a taste? It's just the right time for a meal, and I'm on very good terms with the shopkeeper, so I should be able to get a 20% discount for us, Song Yuxiao proposed. As soon as Chan Ping'an heard about the 20% discount, he immediately declared in a rare display of generosity, "I'll foot the bill then." An amused smile appeared on Song Yuxiao's face. "Are you sure? Let me make this clear in advance. A hot pot meal and the best wine that the restaurant has to offer will be at least 5 or 6 taels of silver." Chan Ping'an immediately rescinded his offer in a completely unabashed manner. "Now that I think about it, the town is a bit far from the villa, so why don't we just have a drink in the courtyard?" Song Yuxiao gave Chan Ping'an a thumbs up as he praised in a facetious manner, "What a truly generous man you are." Chan Ping'an suddenly burst into laughter as he declared, "Fine, let's go. We're having hot pot for lunch today, and that's final." Song Yuxiao faltered slightly, but he didn't give Chan Ping'an a chance to change his mind. He sprang out of the waterside pavilion and rushed out of the villa, instructing Chan Ping'an to follow along behind him. Chan Ping'an had been thinking to invite Xianxia and Zhang Feng as well, but he could only abandon that idea and trail behind Song Yuxiao. As he was springing over the roof of the waterside pavilion, Chan Ping'an turned back to the pavilion with a smile on his face. He had used his finger to carve out 2 lines of text onto the rock wall behind the waterfall in secret. One line contained the name of a certain girl, while the second line read, "Chan Ping'an was here." He was hoping that the next time he returned to Sword Water Villa, that girl would be by his side, but of course that was only something that he dared to think about in the privacy of his own mind. On Clayvase Alley and Apricot Blossom Alley, whenever a household had to hold a funeral or a wedding, the neighbors were always willing to offer their help. This was an unspoken tradition that had been passed down in the town for generations, much like the tradition of adding soil to graves during each visit. On this day, someone on Apricot Blossom Alley was getting married, and the wife was a wealthy woman from Peach Leaf Alley. This family from Apricot Blossom Alley had a very good reputation, and back in the day, even someone as nasty as Granny Ma had gotten along quite well with this household. Hence, close to 20 tables were laid out for the wedding, and anyone could come in and have a meal as long as they submitted a red pocket of any amount, whether that be 1 piece of scrap silver or even just a few copper coins. There were several unfamiliar faces at the wedding, but one of them was slightly more recognizable than the others. It was an old man who lived in an old house on Clayvase Alley, and often took strolls around the town wearing the attire of a very wealthy man. Over time, everyone had become familiar with him, and his surname was Chow, so everyone liked to call him Old Man Chow. He was always very friendly and polite to everyone, displaying none of the arrogance and detachment one would expect to see in a man of his wealth, and he would often chat for long periods of time with his neighbors about nothing in particular. He was very friendly with Old Man Han, who was the head of the family where the wedding was being held, so on this day, he had arrived with a lavish red pocket, and Old Man Han had specifically brought his son and daughter-in-law over to Old Man Chow's table to offer a toast. Old Man Chow had brought 3 people with him, all of whom also had the Chow surname. One of them was a handsome young man by the name of Chow Jun, and he lived in the same old house on Clayvase Alley. There was also another grandfather and grandson duo who had only recently come to the small town, and apparently, They were relatives of Old Man Chow from the capital city. They seemed to be refined scholars who also held themselves with a special type of dignity and poise, indicating that they were perhaps government officials, but of course, it could also be the case that all people from the capital city had this particular disposition. Old Man Chow was a very outgoing man, and was often seen approaching other tables to propose toasts. As for the grandfather and grandson duo who had come to the capital city, they were clearly not very accustomed to such a rowdy setting, and as a result, they appeared quite reserved and out of place, remaining seated in their chairs and only occasionally having some food and wine. In contrast, Chow Jun seemed to be a bit more comfortable. He sat on a long bench and he drank by himself, looking at Old Man Chow with amusement as he made small talk with some of the other old men present. The bride's household on Peach Leaf Alley had suffered a bit of a fall from grace since its heyday, but was still far wealthier than the groom's household. Hence, the head of the bride's family was a little reserved and unwilling to engage with others, and everyone from Apricot Blossom Alley and Clay Vase Alley felt this to be quite normal. Even if the households on Fortune Street and Peach Leaf Alley were no longer what they used to be, they were still far superior to the average household in the small town, and if it weren't for the fact that Old Man Han's son was a capable of young man who had found himself an official post in the Dragon Spring Prefecture office, there was no way that he would have been able to take a bride from Peach Leaf Alley. Old Man Chow began to make his way over to another table, while Chow Jun took a mouthful of whatever was on his plate, then grimaced and hurriedly picked up his cup of wine to chase the food down. He then turned to the grandfather and grandson duo before asking in the official dialect of the Great Li Empire, "Is the food and drink not to your liking? I can take you elsewhere to have a better meal if you'd like." The grandfather was an elderly man wearing an azure robe, and he smiled as he shook his head in response. "There's no need to go to such trouble. I'm not looking down on the customs and traditions here. It's just that my stomach has gotten accustomed to the Buddhist cuisine from the capital, and I'm not used to eating so much meat and heavy foods. Besides, Dragon Spring Prefecture is where the ancestors of our Chow clan came from, so we certainly can't forget our roots." Chow Jun smiled as he nodded in response. "How unfortunate it is for our clan that we had such a foolish ancestral patriarch." The old man didn't dare to reply to this. The ancestral patriarch of the Chow clan was an 11th tier swordsman, and even as an important government official, the old man didn't dare to raise a single word of criticism against the esteemed ancestral patriarch. The grandson was a young man who was just as handsome as Chow Jun, and his name was Chow Mao. He was the newly assigned kiln supervision official of the Dragon Spring Prefecture, and he was renowned in the Great Li Empire's Imperial as a handsome and capable young representative of the Chow clan. At the time, it was Chow Mao who had welcomed the Imperial Preceptor of the Great Li Empire at the Locust Residence relay station on his own, and he had been reeking of alcohol at the time, presenting a rather casual and uncouth image that was in stark contrast with other esteemed young masters of the capital city. As Chow Shi returned to his chair, even Chow Mao unconsciously sat up straighter. The azure-robed old man hurriedly set down his chopsticks, then picked up the wine flagon to fill the cup of the esteemed ancestral patriarch Chow Shi, who knew how many generations his senior. Chow Shi downed the cup of wine in one go, then set down the empty cup. After taking a glance at the guests that were still piling in through the door, he rose to his feet as he said, "Let's not overstay our welcome. It's time to vacate these seats for the people coming after us." With that, the four of them left the courtyard and walked along the tables that had been arranged in all of the neighboring households in the alley. Chow Shi led the trio into Clay Vase Alley, then casually asked, "Has your emperor returned to the capital city?" The old man replied in a respectful voice, "His Majesty is feeling a little unwell, and he's already left for the capital city from the relay station in the Dragon Spring Prefecture." While passing by the Gu family residence, Chow Shi took a glance at the uninhabited house with its tattered door gods and couplets, and he stopped in his tracks as he said, "I hear that the mother and son who used to live here have been taken by the river-severing True Lord to Cyan Gorge Island in Bamboo Scroll Lake. That boy by the name of Gu can had a massive blessing fall onto his lap prior to leaving the town, granting him control over a water fate comparable in power to a 10th tier chi refiner. On top of that, the water flood dragon has been rapidly progressing in its cultivation base, and there's a very good chance that it could go beyond the 10th tier in the next few decades. Is all of that true?" The old man nodded in response. The Imperial Court of the Great Li Empire set up an intelligence organization under the personal supervision of the Imperial Preceptor, and the organization is responsible for documenting the lives of the children growing up in Jewel's small world. Not only was Gukan selected from this town, there were also children like Ma Kuxuan from Apricot Blossom Alley, Zhao Yao from Fortune Street, and Xianxia of the Xie clan. However, there are also some outsiders who encountered significant opportunities here, such as Prince Gao Xian of Great Sui Nation. There are 16 of those fortunate individuals in total. Xiaoxi continued onward for a short while, then stopped in his tracks once again as he asked, "What about the people who used to live in these 2 houses?" He was referring to a pair of neighboring houses, one of which had been occupied by Song Jisun, now named Song Mu, and he had recently returned to the capital city with the emperor. The other house had been inhabited by a boy named Chan Ping'an. He had since embarked on a journey down south, but he owned 2 shops in the town and 5 mountains in the west. An awkward look appeared on the old man's face as he replied, "Chan Ping'an and His Highness don't appear to be among the 16 children that I mentioned earlier." Xiaoxi nodded in response, then asked, "What about Li Shisheng?" "He's not one of them either," the old man replied with a shake of his head. Xiaoxi turned to Xiao Jun, who had a pair of swords strapped to his waist, one long and one short. "You faced Li Shisheng in battle before. Even though he's only a 6th-tier cultivator and you're a 9th-tier swordsman, I recall that you weren't able to get the better of him. What do you think of him? What do you want me to say? He's strong and I'm trash."
Xiao Yun grumbled.
Xiaoxi smiled as he said, "Very soon you'll be traveling to the border to join the army. If you're lucky, you'll be able to stay by Song Changjing's side and accompany the Greatly Empire's cavalry in their southbound crusade. Perhaps you'll only stop after conquering everything up to the central region of Eastern Treasured Vile Continent. What do you think of that?" "It's just another way to pass the time," Xiao Jun replied in a straightforward fashion. Qiao Mao couldn't help but feel a hint of genuine admiration toward Xiao Jun. Both of them appeared to be around the same age, but in reality there was an age gap of around 60 years between them. Recently, the 2 of them had been drinking together quite regularly, and Qiao Mao had come to learn that Xiao Jun's lackadaisical demeanor wasn't just an act. Instead, it was truly his personality. A stern look appeared on Xiaoxi's face as he declared, "If you don't kill a 10th-tier cultivator or 2 within the next decade, I'll kill you myself." Xiao Jun interlaced his hands behind the back of his head as he turned to Qiao Mao with a smile and said, "Make sure to give me a proper burial after I'm dead. Just bury me over at the immortal tomb. The feng shui there is quite nice. Having a bodhisattva statue and a Taoist heavenly official as neighbors would definitely put me in a good mood, as neither of them will do any talking, so I'll definitely be able to rest in peace." Xiaoxi immediately flared up with rage. "You little shit. Do you know how much I had to sacrifice to repair that Khanate sword Qi Lotus Pond in your body?" Xiao Jun's smile widened even further, and his eyes narrowed into slits, giving him the appearance of a sly fox as he replied, "How am I supposed to know that? How about you tell me?" A cold sneer appeared on Xiaoxi's face as he said, "You are a disgrace to the family name. No matter what we do for you, you won't amount to anything. Piss off. Go to the capital and seek out Song Changjing. Then go straight to the southern border. I don't want to see you again in the next 10 years. Xiao Jun didn't need any further invitation to leave, and he did so without any hesitation, springing up from the ground and flying away toward the north. Qiao Mao was aware of the rules of this place, and he was just about to caution Xiao Jun not to take flight, but it was already too late. On the bank of Dragon Whisker River to the south of the small town, Ruanqiong chuckled coldly. "He never learns, does he?" In the next instant, a long sword slowly rose up into the clear, blue sky of Dragon Spring Prefecture, resembling a geyser gushing up into the heavens. "Ruanqiong, must you be so dogmatic with your rules?" Xiaoxi's expression darkened slightly as his green rope-like bonded flying sword appeared in his grasp with a flick of his wrist. This was the weapon that had allowed Xiaoxi to reign supreme over southern world continent, a pseudo-celestial tool that had been refined from an enormous river by an ancient deity. The sword remained concealed within Xiaoxi's sleeve, wound around his wrist, but as it trembled slightly, wisps of green vapor rose up into the air, then sped rapidly toward the departing Xiao Jun. Meanwhile, Ruanqiong's sword was hurtling toward Xiao Jun's head far faster than the speed at which he was flying toward the north, and barring any mishaps, he was inevitably going to be decapitated before he could leave Jewel's small world. Fortunately for him, a huge green river suddenly appeared between him and Ruanqiong's flying sword. The sword sliced through the river, which was only several kilometers wide, but the river was folding in on itself to produce layers of obstacles that obstructed the flying sword over and over again. However, the flying sword was still able to pierce through the seemingly endless expanse of water, slicing through the waves with unstoppable might. Xiao Jun continued to fly onward as he swiveled around in midair, and the long sword strapped to his waist flew out of its scabbard, striking the tip of Ruanqiong's flying sword with unerring accuracy. His long sword was instantly repelled back, and he threw up a mouthful of blood, but he was flying away even faster than before. At the same time, the vast green river wrapped itself tightly around Ruanqiong's flying sword, and streaks of sword chi were constantly shooting out of the green river until it was completely pulverized into countless water droplets that rained down from the heavens. However, before the water droplets had a chance to fall to the ground, they reverted back into streaks of green sword chi that returned to Clay Vase Alley. Meanwhile, Ruan Qiong's bonded flying sword was completely unscathed as it hovered in midair, and a brief moment later, a small pool of water emerged beneath the flying sword. The sword slowly descended into the pond, and with that, it completely vanished out of sight. Chao Jun had taken advantage of the force of Ruan Qiong's attack to propel himself through the air, and he was chortling with mirth as he flew through the air. Sometimes a strong gust of wind is all that's needed to carry one to the heavens. Thank you for seeing me off, Sage Ruan. On Clay Vase Alley, the azure-robed old man was looking on with an awestruck expression. He wasn't a chi refiner, but the Chao clan had no lack of formidable cultivators serving as guest elders. However, it was still an extremely rare occurrence for him to witness such a spectacular clash between immortals. As for Chao Mao, there was a concerned look on his face as he asked, "What are we going to do if the sage of this place comes after us, esteemed ancestral patriarch?" A cold sneer appeared on Chao Shi's face as he replied, "I may not be able to beat that 12th tier Taoist heavenly lord of complete Reed continent, but I'm certainly not going to fear some newly ascended 11th tier swordsman. Chao Jun on his own is already enough of a disgrace to our Chao clan. I certainly can't humiliate our clan any further." Only in this instant did Chao Mao truly come to realize why their ancestral patriarch, who appeared to be just a friendly old man in the small town, was able to become the guardian of that seaside mighty suppressing pagoda. Ruan Qiong had appeared at the other end of Clay Vase Alley, and he provoked, "How about we put that to the test?" Chao Shi refused to back down. "Sure. You pick the place, I'll pick the time. There's an uninhabited ridge in the mountains to the west that has a formation set up by the Great Li Empire. That should suffice as a battlefield for us to settle this once and for all," Ruan Qiong immediately proposed without any hesitation. Chao Shi nodded firmly in response. "All right, in that case, let's fight in 100 years. Ruan Qiong faltered slightly upon hearing this, then spat disdainfully onto the ground before departing. Chao Mao couldn't help but bury his face in his hand, while the azure-robed old man didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "Why are you all looking like that? This is called strategy. You two don't know shit." Chao Shi scoffed with a roll of his eyes. Chao Shi made his way into the old house on Clay Vase Alley, and Chao Mao and his grandfather were just about to follow him inside when the door was slammed shut right in their faces. The two of them could only exchange a wry smile before sheepishly departing from Clay Vase Alley and making their way to the kiln supervision office, where they would discuss the clan's future plans. At this point, the storm had already descended upon Eastern Treasured Vile Continent, and the situation was very much in the favor of the Great Li Empire, so the earlier they could get in, the more they would stand to profit. On top of that, there was another massively favorable circumstance for the Chao clan at the moment, which was that Chao Shi was going to remain in Eastern Treasured Vile Continent for some time, and the prodigious swordsman Chao Jun was going to join the Great Li Empire's border army. In light of this, the emperor of the Great Li Empire was definitely going to favor the Chao clan, and it was all but certain that they would be able to dominate their sworn enemies, the Yuan clan, for the foreseeable future. Back in the bamboo building on Downtrodden Mountain, Cui Chan's grandfather had grown accustomed to wearing coarse clothes and walking around barefoot, but after that visit from Lu Chan, he seemed to have suddenly had a change of heart, putting on a scholarly azure robe and also crafting a bamboo cane and a pair of wooden clogs for himself to help him traverse through the mountain forest. He also began frequently making his way down the mountain to purchase books and stationery, arranging the second floor of the bamboo building into a refined study, and he would pick up a brush to practice his calligraphy whenever he had some time to spare. The little girl in pink and the little boy in azure didn't know what to make of this, and they initially thought that he had gone insane due to chi deviation. However, after witnessing the old man's calligraphy, the little girl in pink began to engage in frequent conversations with him, and only then did she discover that he was truly an astute scholar with exceptional expertise in all four areas of musical instruments, Go, calligraphy, and painting. Furthermore, he was also extremely well versed in all things related to Orthodox Confucianism. The little boy in azure didn't care about all of that. All he was worried about was his own survival, and he wanted nothing more than to practice martial arts under the old man so that he could become the top dog that reigned supreme in this small world. Only then would he be able to rest easy at night. Hence, he would often go to the old man and nag him insistently, telling him that the Dragon Spring Prefecture was filled with formidable figures, and even the slightest bit of complacency could result in his downfall. He told the old man that the Great Li Empire was a very perilous and unpredictable place, and that the only way to truly keep oneself safe was to attain unmatched power. Unfortunately for him, the old man completely ignored him, and at the very most, he would only occasionally chat with the little girl in pink to impart upon her some of his vast wealth of knowledge. It seemed that he had discarded his pursuit of martial arts altogether, leaving the little boy in azure feeling extremely exasperated. In the end, he decided that he could only count on himself, so he continued to cultivate on his own, doing his best to digest the 2 top-grade snake gall pebbles that he had devoured. Having recently been officially instated as the formal god of the northern mountain, Weibo had become extremely busy, but he would still occasionally make time to come to the bamboo building to examine the small pond that the lotus flower seed had been tossed into. Aside from leaving that lotus flower seed on Downtrodden Mountain, Qian Pingyan had also heeded Weibo's advice, leaving one of his spare seals on the first floor of the bamboo building. As the owner of Downtrodden Mountain, his seals could serve as subjugation treasures on the mountain, and the seal that he had chosen to leave behind was the one on which Qi Jingchun had engraved the words, Chanxi. There was nothing particularly special about the seal. It simply contained a blessing for Qian Pingyan from Qi Jingchun. All martial artists who ascended to beyond the 10th tier were considered to be martial gods, and they could rank alongside the most powerful qi refiners under the heavens. The little girl in pink regarded the seal as an object of the utmost importance, almost giving it more weight than the bookcase that Cui Chan had assigned to her. Each day, she would secretly take out the small seal that her master had given to her 3 times to carefully clean it with a silken cloth. No matter what strategies the little boy in azure employed to try and get her to hand over the seal, she refused to budge. Thanks to the snake gall pebbles given to her by Qian Pingyan, the little girl in pink had already broken through the final hurdle of the lower 5 tiers, thereby reaching the cave abode tier. After that would come the sea observation tier, the dragon gate tier, the golden core tier, and the nascent tier. There was still a very long way to go, and her journey was far from over. However, in contrast with the sea observation tier little boy in azure, who had suddenly become desperate to make progress in his cultivation, the little girl in pink was taking a much more natural and relaxed approach. All she would do every single day was ensure that the bamboo building was spotlessly clean, and outside of that, she would read some books or look at the scenery, resulting in a mental state that was far more calm and relaxed than that of the little boy in azure. All of a sudden, the roles had been reversed, and it was the little boy in azure looking down on her for being lazy and complacent. That night, the little boy in azure was meditating atop the cliff, while the little girl in pink was seated on a small bamboo chair, eating some sunflower seeds. Cui Chan's grandfather made his way downstairs, then dragged over another bamboo chair to sit down beside the little girl in pink, and he said, "For the past 1,000 years, our Cui clan has been one of the most respected and highly educated clans on Eastern Treasured Vile Continent, yet we've never been able to nurture a fire python as wise as yourself. That just goes to show that blessings can only come naturally, and there's no point in striving for them excessively." A smile appeared on the face of the little girl in pink as she asked, "Grandpa Cui, do you think my master has made a breakthrough yet?" A hint of schadenfreude appeared on the old man's face as he chuckled. "I made him into the most formidable 3rd-tier martial artist, so there's no way he could make a breakthrough so easily. I'd say he's still far from reaching that stage. Perhaps his cultivation base will have remained completely unmoved even by the time he gets to Old Dragon City. Maybe he'll be so disheartened by his lack of progress that he'll turn to drowning his sorrows every day, and turn into a dejected little drunkard. You taught my master half of his fist techniques, Grandpa Cui. How could you be happy at the thought of him being unable to make a breakthrough?" the little girl in pink complained. The old man burst into laughter and he explained, "You're not a martial artist, so you don't know what it entails for someone to be the most formidable 3rd-tier martial artist under the heavens. Back when I killed guest elder son Shujian with a single punch, he was at the pinnacle of the 6th tier while I was only at the 5th tier. Why was I able to do that? It's because all martial artists have different foundations. Some have terrible foundations, and their cultivation bases resemble tall buildings that would sway and wobble even in the face of a light breeze, whereas those with solid foundations possess cultivation bases as immovable as mountains." A concerned look appeared on the face of the little girl in pink as she said, "There's no one to look after my master on this journey, so he has to do everything on his own. Will that hinder his training?" The old man took a glance at the little boy in azure, then turned his gaze back to the little boy in azure as he said, "It's a testament to Qian Pingyan's character that he was not only able to keep you two together, but also prevent you from fighting even in his absence. I wonder if he'll continue to be able to maintain the same level of purity and fairness once he becomes a wealthy and powerful man in the future. Running a small household and leading a large clan are 2 entirely different endeavors." The little girl in pink raised her head as she asked in an adorable display of naivety, "If my master really does become the leader of a large clan someday, will you be able to help him, Grandpa Cui?" The old man patted her on the head as he replied, There are some matters that outsiders simply can't lend their assistance in. He then rose to his feet and pointed into the distance as he continued. Imagine that someday, Qian Ping'an establishes a sect of his own. In that sect will be you, the little water snake, that black snake from Go Table Mountain, and all of these mountains. Someday, all of these mountains will be occupied by formidable beings, such as the boy who accepted Qian Ping'an as his master and all of those children who refer to Qian Ping'an as their junior uncle. In the eyes of mortals, yours will be an immortal sect, and there will inevitably come a time when the sect elders wish to accept disciples. Eventually, there will be tens, hundreds, thousands, even tens of thousands of people under Qian Ping'an. If a conflict arises between two people close to him, then that will be a complex issue that can't just be resolved with a punch or a slash of a sword. In that case, what should he do? Having read all types of historical records back in that library in Yellow Court Nation, the little girl in pink was aware of just how difficult a problem this was, and she wasn't even in the mood to eat sunflower seeds anymore. The old man smiled as he said, "Then again, there's no need to be overly concerned. There's one good thing about Qian Ping'an that not many people have been able to identify." The little girl in pink waited for a long while for the old man to elaborate, but he remained silent, so she couldn't help but ask, "Grandpa Chui, my master is already so good and virtuous. What other good things could there possibly be about him that I don't know about?" The old man erupted into laughter. "There's one thing really good about you, and that's your ability to suck up to others, particularly your master, in a way that's completely natural and unpretentious." The little girl in pink was a little embarrassed to hear this. She wasn't making an effort to suck up to anyone. She truly felt like her master was the best master in the world. The old man sat down by his bamboo, and he didn't try to build any further suspense as he revealed, "Qian Ping'an is very easygoing, and all of the people close to him will take that for granted. However, someday, something will come up that'll make Qian Ping'an extremely stubborn and unyielding, perhaps the most unyielding man under the heavens. When that happens, something strange will follow. Everyone will feel scared and uneasy, and that'll prevent them from trying to talk back to him." The little girl in pink hurriedly joined her palms together as she prayed, "I hope master never gets angry." The old man heaved a faint sigh. Despite how proud the old man was and the vast age gap between him and Qian Ping'an, he had to admit that he didn't have very much to teach Qian Ping'an when it came to being a better person. However, if it weren't for that, he wouldn't have been willing to choose Qian Ping'an as the one to inherit his fist techniques. What was the point in accepting a disciple if not for the hope that the disciple could surpass the teacher? If they couldn't best him, what would it matter even if he were to accept 1,000 disciples? In the grand scheme of things, they would still just be ants waiting to be crushed. An uneasy look suddenly appeared on the face of the little girl in pink as she asked, "What if you do something that makes my master angry someday, Grandpa Chui? Would you be scared?" The old man gave her a flick on the forehead, then rose to his feet before storming away as he grumbled, "What kind of question is that?" Over at the cliff, the little boy in azure had actually been eavesdropping on their conversation this entire time. He turned to the little girl in pink with a sly grin and gave her a thumbs up, while the little girl in pink began to happily munch on sunflower seeds again. Even though the old man had refused to answer the question, the answer was already apparent to her. Year after year, Old Man Yang of the Yang family's medicine shop had looked after that tiny backyard. He had witnessed countless generations of the Yang clan over the course of countless years, including all of the past clan leaders, as well as certain figures in the clan who had been fortunate enough to become chi refiners. There were some who were able to uncover that astonishing secret, and all of them would help Old Man Yang carefully guard that secret, while the rest of the clan's members and the medicine shop's employees were only aware that there was an old man in the shop that was around the same age as the oldest seniors in the clan. All they knew about this old man was that he never seemed to go out, and he had a very strange personality that made him rather difficult to deal with. He was an expert when it came to saving lives, but of course he charged a very steep price for his services. Regardless of who it was, if they couldn't afford his services, then he would tell them to prepare a coffin. The coffin shop was on the same street anyway, so it was very convenient. On this day, Old Man Yang was smoking his pipe in the backyard as usual, but on this particular occasion, he was holding a newly published novel from the bookstore. The novel came from the fictionist school of thought, which was once quite a prominent school of thought, but as time passed, its influence and relevance gradually faded, as had been the case for Moism. In the end, it was relegated to just another one of the 100 schools of thought, known mostly for publishing unofficial historical records, as well as raunchy stories that appealed to the masses. On top of that, they also dabbled in writing hit pieces against certain important figures or events. There were many emperors and generals throughout history that had had their reputations dragged through the mud by these hit pieces. For example, there were some capable officials who had dedicated their entire lives to serving and bettering the nation to whom they had pledged their allegiance. But in the end, what they were known for wasn't their heroic and commendable feats. Instead, they were associated with scandalous stories like how they had to sleep with at least 10 women every single night. There were also stories of great Confucian saints and virtuous individuals who became known as shameless perverts who would sink as low as to assault nuns at night for their own perverse pleasure. As a result, all of their brilliant quotes and books were naturally also disregarded as the depraved ramblings of perverts and scoundrels. This was why a saint from a school of Confucianism had once declared in fury and indignation that fictionists were a plague to the entire world. However, the etiquette sage, responsible for setting the rules of the world, treated fictionists in much the same way as he did the demon tribe, affording them the greatest degree of tolerance and acceptance. This was why Old Man Yang wasn't particularly fond of either of the parties involved in the conflict between the second sage and the scholarly sage on Middle-earth Divine Continent. At the very most, Old Man Yang was only willing to praise the knowledge and intellect of the scholarly sage. As for the second sage, who, despite his title, was actually only ranked third in the Confucian temples, Old Man Yang found him to be rather despicable. In his eyes, the term pretentious was perfect for describing the second sage. The novel that Old Man Yang was holding was still giving off a faint inky fragrance, and it had been purchased for him by a shop employee from the street in the Dragon Spring prefecture lined with bookshops. The novel detailed the major achievements of many heroic figures. Whenever they found themselves in dire straits, there would always be no lack of defiant words from them, all of which boiled down to blaming the gods for their blindness. Whenever Old Man Yang came across these quotes, he seemed to be rather amused, and in the end he closed the book as he chuckled to himself. These young people really need to learn to blame themselves rather than the gods. He then stowed the book away and lit his pipe, then took out what appeared to be a miniature temple out of his sleeve. He threw the temple onto the ground, then tapped the ground beside his foot with his bamboo pipe as he called out, "Come out, Song Qing." A plume of smoke billowed out of the entrance of the miniature temple on the ground, and the smoke quickly took on the form of a wizened old man, who extended a deep bow toward Old Man Yang as he greeted in a respectful voice, "I pay my respects to the esteemed divine lord." Old Man Yang paid no heed to the greeting as he instructed, "I'll allow you to leave this place, and as long as you remain within Eastern Treasured Vile Continent, you'll be restored to your former cultivation base. Your duty will be to protect Chao Jun of the Chao clan on Clay Vase Alley. As long as Chao Jun can fully mend the sword pond in his heart, the members of your branch of the Song clan will be sure to enjoy a resurgence that'll guarantee them wealth and prosperity for at least the next century. After that, what becomes of them will be up to them." The old man was present in the form of a Yin soul, but there was still a long sword formed by smoke hanging from his waist. The sword was already completely devoid of sword chi, but was brimming with sword intent, clearly indicating that he had been a formidable swordsman back when he was alive. After hearing Old Man Yang's promise, an elated look appeared on his face, and he extended another deep bow in gratitude. "Thank you for your kindness, esteemed divine lord." With a sweep of his sleeve, Old Man Yang released a series of talismans that adhered themselves everywhere on the old Yin soul. Those talismans would ensure the old Yin soul's safety as he traveled the world, and with their addition, the soul was instantly and significantly stabilized. As a result, his aura and sword intent were both drastically elevated, and if they hadn't been concealed by that large cloud of smoke that Old Man Yang had just released out of his mouth, all of the chi refiners in the entirety of Dragon Spring Prefecture would have been alerted. "Go," Old Man Yang said. "Chao Jun has already set off for the capital city of the Great Li Empire. You can directly inform him of this arrangement. If you dare to break the rules, not only will you be wiped out of existence, I will personally see to it that your entire branch of the Song clan is eradicated entirely. Your lineage will be completely severed, and your branch of the Song clan will be lost to history. Do you understand?" "I wouldn't dare to step out of line, esteemed divine lord," Song Qing assured in a solemn manner. "Your words mean nothing, I'll be watching your actions," Old Man Yang said in a cold voice. Song Qing nodded in response, then vanished in a flash. Following Song Qing's departure, Old Man Yang raised his head up to look at the sky, and he remained silent for a long while before finally heaving a resigned sigh. People say that the gods are watching one's every move, and karma will always come around. If that really were the case, then would we be in such a position right now? On the second floor of the restaurant in the town outside Sword Water Villa, Chan Ping'an and Song Yuxiao were seated across from one another at a windowside table, having a hot pot. The table between them was laden with things like spring bamboo shoots, beef aorta, lamb, goose intestines, duck blood. Of course, there were also 2 flagons of fine wine and a cup of the restaurant's signature red hot sauce. For those with a low spice tolerance, This sauce was enough to make their skin crawl. Qian Ping'an's spice tolerance wasn't actually all that exceptional, but after some goading, Song Yuxiao eventually convinced him to grab a dish, telling him that this restaurant had 7 or 8 types of hot sauce, and that it would be a lifelong regret for Qian Ping'an if he didn't try out all of them. Only then did Qian Ping'an muster up his courage to add a spoonful of hot sauce to his dish. Due to the fact that Song Yuxiao never showed himself in his true identity in the villa and the nearby town, the portly restaurant owner wasn't aware that the old man eating here was the sword saint of water-combing nation. All he knew was that the old man had the Song surname, and he was an expert when it came to all things food. The hot pot and fine wine that he served certainly wouldn't go to waste on such an avid foodie, so the shopkeeper was very happy to see Song Yuxiao visiting with a friend this time. He personally led them up to the second floor to this window-side table, and served them himself all of the dishes and wine. It didn't take long before Qian Ping'an was sweating profusely, and his face was deeply flushed, but the food was truly delicious and he couldn't stop eating. On top of that, he was paying for this meal, so it simply wouldn't sit right with him if he didn't eat as much as possible. Song Yuxiao was looking on with amusement as Qian Ping'an continued to stuff food down his own throat, and whenever the spice became too much for him, he would foolishly try to alleviate the pain by having a sip of wine. The temporary relief would immediately be followed by even more intense burning pain, and it was quickly turning into a vicious cycle. Even so, Qian Ping'an wasn't willing to take even a short break, and he kept staring intently into the pot to see which items were cooked and ready to eat. Song Yuxiao was in a fantastic mood upon seeing this, and he was also eating a lot faster than he normally would have when eating alone. Song Yuxiao suddenly raised his cup as he said, "According to the old rules, I shouldn't have appeared in that waterside pavilion. A breakthrough for a martial artist is just like seclusion for a qi refiner, and it's considered to be taboo for bystanders to be present, so I'm going to have a cup of wine as punishment." As soon as his voice trailed off, he downed his cup of wine in one go. Qian Ping'an hurriedly raised his cup as well, then forced down the food in his mouth before downing his wine as well. After that, he poured another cup of wine for himself to raise a toast as he said, "If you hadn't been present, I wouldn't have been able to get closer to the 4th tier at all, so I should be thanking you." Song Yuxiao reciprocated the toast by having another cup of wine himself. Song Yuxiao cast his gaze toward the streets outside through the window. Occasionally, a passerby would meet his gaze, upon which they would hurriedly lower their heads, not daring to maintain eye contact. A faint smile appeared on Song Yuxiao's face as he withdrew his gaze and said, "I went to the waterside pavilion earlier today as there was something that I had to tell you in person. You have to leave the villa tonight no matter what. Do not stay for the alliance leader election ceremony tomorrow." Qian Ping'an continued to eat and drink, but he slowed down slightly as he asked, "Is someone targeting the villa?" Song Yuxiao made no effort to hide the truth, replying in a candid fashion, "That's right. A storm is coming, but it has nothing to do with you." Song Yuxiao then raised his cup as he continued, "It's not that I'm looking down on you and your friends, it's just that these are our Sword Water Villa's internal affairs, so it wouldn't be appropriate for you to get involved. In any case, it's not right of me as the host to be evicting a guest, so I have to drink another cup of wine as punishment. You can do as you please." Qian Ping'an really did as he pleased, and he only took a small sip of wine in response. Song Yuxiao was unbothered by this, and he picked up a piece of goose intestine with his chopsticks, then swished it around in the pot for a while before coating it in hot sauce and carefully savoring it. Qian Ping'an wanted to say something, but didn't seem to know where to start. Song Yuxiao smiled as he said, "Right now we have to focus on eating, and we're not going to talk about anything. Fine people, fine food, and fine scenery are the 3 things in life that can't be squandered." Qian Ping'an lowered his head and continued to eat. Everything had to eventually come to an end, however, and even the best hot pot meal was bound to end. After all of the food was finished, Qian Ping'an set down his chopsticks. The wine flagons had also run dry, with Qian Ping'an drinking far more wine than he normally would have. Not only was his face bright red, his neck and his ears were aloe brightly flushed as he said in a drunken voice, "Those 2 from Unruly Saber Villa don't seem to have any intentions of coming after me." Song Yuxiao smiled. "There's no telling what people are thinking. There have been many stories of vendettas being settled years down the line. Thankfully, you're not from Watercombing Nation, and you'll be leaving soon, perhaps never to return. Otherwise, you'll have a lot to deal with." Song Yuxiao suddenly recalled something as he was speaking, and he continued, "You seemed to be quite angry at the waterside pavilion at the time, and I found that to be rather strange. If I were just a normal bystander who didn't know anything about you, I would have considered you to be quite impudent. As the master of Unruly Saber Villa, Wang Iran has been a vastly renowned martial arts master for many years, yet he treated you with a great deal of respect. Not only did he not try to intimidate you, he was even willing to apologize to you on behalf of his daughter. So why was it that you still looked so indignant? Qian Ping'an burped, then removed the sword-nurturing gourd from his waist, but instead of drinking from it, he contemplated the question momentarily before replying, I don't have anything against Wang Yiran, I just feel like there was something wrong about that entire situation. What do you mean by that? Song Yuxiao asked. Qian Ping'an took another sip of wine then explained, I once heard an old man speak about the order of things. I'm not well educated and I don't know many characters, so I only had a very surface-level understanding of what he told me at the time, but I like to think these things over whenever I have some free time, and it's occurred to me that there's an order when it comes to what's right and wrong. Of course, there are also varying degrees to which something can be right or wrong, and one can't justify something that they previously did wrong just because they did something right after that, even if they only made a very minor mistake before making significant amends. I think it's important to dissect that minor mistake from earlier and truly understand it. Only then will the amends that are made later have a point. It's just like when you're walking, one step has to be taken at a time. Now, of course, these are just things that I've come up with myself and they may not actually be correct. During this journey down south, I've read many books, and none of them have mentioned anything, so I've never been sure if I'm right or not. However, if we were to apply this concept to what happened at the waterside pavilion, then it wasn't correct or necessary for Wang Yiran to apologize to me. Instead, all that was needed was for his daughter to apologize to me, and that would have been the end of the matter. Just because Wang Yiran is a renowned martial artist doesn't mean that I have any obligation to accept an apology from him. And even if I was willing to accept the apology, does that absolve his daughter of all wrongdoing? I don't think that's right. Even if he did the right thing, it does nothing to change the fact that his daughter was at fault. If this isn't properly addressed, then she'll continue to make the same mistakes tomorrow, the day after tomorrow, and perhaps even 10 years down the line. Qian Ping'an scratched his own head, then continued in a slightly sheepish manner. This is all just straight from my mind, Senior Song. Just treat it as some nonsensical ramblings. Song Yuxiao was initially stunned by what he heard. But then, a look of enlightenment appeared on his face, and he felt as if his entire worldview had suddenly been turned upside down. He thought back over his own life, particularly the painful tragedy surrounding his son, Song Gaofeng. Prior to this, he didn't want to recall those events, and didn't wish to think too deeply about who was at fault or who was to blame, but only after hearing what Qian Ping'an had to say just now did he truly come to realize where the knot in his heart stemmed from, as well as why he had always been so racked with guilt and remorse, to the point that he had been unable to even directly face the knot in his heart. Tears were beginning to well up in his eyes, and his hands were trembling as he picked up a piece of food from the bottom of the pot with his chopsticks. As he placed the bit of food into his mouth and began slowly chewing, a smile slowly surfaced on his face. All of the old rules that he had abided by his entire life, the very same rules that were seen as gospel by the older generation, only now did he realize that those rules weren't entirely without their flaws. What had Song Gaofeng done wrong all those years ago? If anyone was at fault in that incident, then it was the state of this world. It wasn't that former alliance leader who had been at fault, and the mistake couldn't be atoned for just because he severed his own arm. It had never been about him in the first place. It was his daughter who had wronged Song Gaofeng, and she was the one who owed him and his wife an apology. Tears were beginning to stream down Song Yuxiao's face, but they went completely unnoticed as he slowly set down his chopsticks, then rose to his feet as he said to Qian Ping'an with a wide smile, I, Song Yuxiao, treat you to this meal on behalf of my son, my daughter-in-law, and the entire Sword Water Villa. The entire second floor of the restaurant erupted into a frenzy. Song Yuxiao. Sword Water Villa. These were two things that had stood at the pinnacle of water-combing nation for the past century. Song Yuxiao paid no heed to the commotion ringing out around him as he cupped his fist toward Qian Ping'an in a salute and continued, There are some things that I must speak to my grandson about, so I'll be going ahead and returning to the villa. I may not be able to see you off when you leave, but as long as I continue to live, you will always be welcome at my Sword Water Villa. Qian Ping'an rose to his feet with a befuddled expression, only to see Song Yuxiao spring out of the window before flying away into the distance. Song Yuxiao flew back to the gates of the villa, then strode over the doorstep, ignoring all of the respectful greetings extended toward him as he made his way straight to a small courtyard that had already been vacant for many years. There he found his grandson Song Fengshan, who was standing in the courtyard, resting with his eyes closed. Song Fengshan opened his eyes but remained silent, just as he had been as a boy standing beside the deathbed of his father and mother. That rusty sword had already been strapped to Song Yuxiao's waist for many years, and it was like a permanent fixture, an extension of his body, but on this day Song Yuxiao removed it from his waist, holding it one hand as he offered it to Song Fengshan. There was a cold look on Song Fengshan's face as he asked, "Why are you giving me this? This is your father's sword, so it's only right that you inherit it as his son." Song Yushao replied in a solemn voice. Song Fengshan continued to refuse to accept the sword as he sneered. "Oh? What is going on today? First, you come and visit me ahead of time to congratulate me on my imminent inauguration as alliance leader, and now you give me this crappy iron sword. Are you finally going to shed yourself of the titles of Sword Water Villa Master and Water Combing Nation Sword Saint and pass them down onto me?" Song Fengshan's hands were clasped behind his back, and despite the sharp and cold look in his eyes, there was a smile on his face as he said, "My sincerest apologies, but I have some terrible news for you, grandfather. The Emperor has personally sent out several confidential imperial edicts, and an imperial army of close to 10,000 elite troops has already assembled outside the city. I presume they'll arrive at our Sword Water Villa as early as tomorrow to slay the treasonous new alliance leader. I'm not asking for you to intervene and save me, grandfather. I'm serious, I'm saying this from the bottom of my heart. All I want for you is to stand by and watch, and all that I ask is that you don't strike me down here and now." Song Yushao looked into his grandson's eyes, and he suddenly burst into hearty laughter as he strode forward, then slammed a palm heavily down onto Song Fengshan's shoulder. He made no attempt to disguise the joy and approval on his face as he declared, "As expected of the son of Song Gaofeng and Lu Qian, I know that the one leading the army is none other than that woman's husband, General Chu Hao." Song Fengshan's brow was tightly furrowed in befuddlement, while Song Yushao continued, "Seeing as that foul wench wants to escalate this matter even further, this is the perfect opportunity for me to finally confront the imperial court and give them a piece of my mind." Tears began to well up in Song Yushao's eyes, and he raised his other hand to gently unfurrow Song Fengshan's brows as he murmured, "After all these years, it's time that your grandfather finally did something for you." Song Fengshan took a step back, then lowered head and covered his face with his arm. Song Yushao continued, "Fengshan, from this day forth, I won't keep trying to drill those so-called old rules into you anymore. However, I want you to listen to what I have to say one final time. The old world is not without its faults, but there are many elements of it that are correct and good, and I hope that you won't renounce those elements when you step into the new world." As his voice trailed off, Song Yushao set the rusty iron sword down onto the stone table in the courtyard, then made his way toward the entrance of the courtyard. On the way there, he cast his gaze toward the main room of the courtyard, and he wanted to say something, but refrained from doing so in the end. "Where are you going, grandfather?" Song Fengshan asked in a raspy and emotional voice. Song Yushao continued onward without turning his head as he replied with a smile, "I have to go fetch my own sword. It's been buried under the pool at the foot of the waterfall all these years." Song Fengshan continued to remain still on the spot as Song Yushao faded into the distance. The door of a room in the courtyard slowly swung open, and a young woman emerged from within as she asked, "You're not going to stop him?" Song Fengshan wiped the tears from his eyes, then gently laid a hand onto the sword on the table as he replied with a confident smile, "We hatched a plan long ago, and everything is progressing in accordance with that plan. Don't you want to see the spectacular sight of a single man stopping an entire army cold in its tracks? At the very least, that's something that I want to see. I've already been envisioning it in my mind for many years." "Why did he suddenly change his mind?" the young woman mused with a perplexed expression, following which a concerned look appeared on her face as she said, "I don't think he's going to be pleased with what our villa does from here onward." Song Fengshan harumphed coldly in response, "If worst comes to worst, I'll just let grandfather stab me a few more times with his sword as punishment. If that still doesn't satisfy him, then I'll bring out father's sword. Let's see if he'll still be able to bear the thought of killing me then." Well, you haven't called him grandfather in over 20 years, yet it's coming out of your mouth as smooth as butter all of a sudden," the young woman jibed. Song Fengshan turned to give her a cold glare, while the young woman merely smiled in response. She was actually a spy of the Great Li Empire, and once the mighty army of the Great Li Empire exerted its dominance over the central region of Eastern Treasured Vile Continent, she would be able to finally reveal her true identity and display that peace and safety tablet awarded to her by the Great Li Empire's imperial court with pride and dignity. Song Fengshan was well aware of all of this. The next day, Water Combing Nation's alliance leader election ceremony was held at Sword Water Villa. At the same time, a mighty army was storming toward Sword Water Villa, and the countless thundering hooves of the army's horses were raising a vast cloud of dust that obscured the entire sky. The army was led by a general clad in a suit of bright armor, straddled atop a tall and majestic horse. There was an eager smile on his face as he cast his gaze into the distance, and he was practically brimming with excitement. Once he raised Sword Water Villa to the ground, He would undoubtedly become the leading military official of Watercombing Nation. All of a sudden, his eyes narrowed slightly. As it turned out, Watercombing Nation's sword saint had appeared up ahead, having retrieved his sword from beneath the waterfall, and he was standing in the way of the formidable army on his own. Actually, he wasn't quite on his own. There was also a young boy with a wine gourd strapped to his waist trailing along far behind him. The young boy didn't appear to be nervous at all in the face of the enormous army up ahead. He simply removed the sword-nurturing gourd from his waist, threw his head back, and took a large swig of wine. Song Yuxiao had only just retrieved his sword from under the waterfall the day before. It was a renowned sword by the name of Immovable, a divine weapon feared by many chi refiners, and it was in a scabbard crafted out of a rare kind of azure bamboo. As it turned out, the first time that Song Yuxiao had seen this sword was precisely in the same place, under the pool at the foot of the waterfall. Furthermore, it had been right under the protruding rock atop which Qian Ping'an had practiced his standing meditation under the waterfall. There was a hidden mechanism in that rock, and Song Yuxiao had managed to obtain the sword by chance. The sword played no small part in the development of his swordsmanship, and it could be said that it was an integral part to his eventual rise to become the sword saint of Watercombing Nation. After reading through countless scriptures, Song Yuxiao had finally found a record pertaining to this sword. It was said that the sword had been forged by a martial god from another continent, but it had later become lost in Eastern Treasured Vile Continent, and it was said to be capable of splitting mountains and vanquishing great evil. Following the passing of Song Gaofeng, Song Yuxiao had taken his son's sword, and his original sword had been returned to its former resting place in the rock. At this moment, this very same sword was strapped to Song Yuxiao's waist as he stood and confronted the army before him, which had slowed down drastically. True to the sword's name, he was standing like an immovable mountain with no fear on his face whatsoever. Out of this formidable army of close to 10,000 troops, there were 3,000 elite cavalry that had been selected from Chu Hao's personal army, and all of them were battle-hardened border veterans. Besides them, there were also almost 5,000 elite soldiers selected from various armies across the entire nation, in addition to over 1,000 law enforcers who directly served the official authorities and formidable martial artists that had been hired at a steep price. Of course, there were also some powerful cultivators who directly served General Chu Hao, and almost all of them had been presented to him by the emperor as part of the dowry of the deceased former alliance leader's daughter. The former alliance leader was long dead, but he had served as alliance leader for close to 20 years and had the backing of the imperial court, so he had secretly developed many loyal subordinates, all of whom now served his son-in-law, Chu Hao. Even though so many years had already passed, Chu Hao's wife still harbored extremely deep resentment toward Swordwater Villa. On the surface, Chu Hao was constantly vowing to exact vengeance for her, but in reality, he knew that Swordwater Villa was not to be messed with unless the perfect opportunity arose. Without an explicit instruction from the emperor, there was no way that he would openly provoke the #1 swordsman of the entire nation. Hence, despite his wife's complaints, Chu Hao remained unmoved and refused to take any action. Thankfully, Swordwater Villa had stepped out of line on this occasion and forced the emperor's hand. Chu Hao immediately seized the opportunity, volunteering to lead the army to vanquish Swordwater Villa. And everything naturally fell into place. Pertaining to this entire situation, not only did Chu Hao's wife have a knot in her heart, Chu Hao himself also had his own gripes. His wife had clearly been aware that Song Gaofeng already had a wife, and the two of them shared a very loving relationship. On top of that, Song Gaofeng's father was the sword saint of Watercombing Nation, so it was a display of extreme entitlement and selfishness for her to demand Song Gaofeng to divorce his wife and marry her just because her father was the alliance leader. The fact that she had gone to destroy that woman's garden and ruin her life out of spite, just because she didn't get the man that she wanted, only served to show how venomous and depraved a woman she was. If Chu Hao had been in Song Gaofeng's place, he would have sent out his entire army to claim her head in retaliation. Having said that, Chu Hao wasn't Song Gaofeng, and despite his internal gripes about his wife's character, he had to admit that marrying her came with a multitude of benefits. Not only had he earned the emperor's trust, he had ended up with a beautiful wife and around a dozen top-tier cultivators and martial artists that served him with absolute loyalty. It was truly killing 3 birds with 1 stone, so whatever qualms and reservations he had about his wife were downright negligible in comparison. Furthermore, after the old alliance leader was slain by Song Gaofeng, the former's daughter had been taught a harsh lesson, and she had learned to become a lot more restrained, sticking to her duties as a housewife for the most part. She also proved herself to be a capable socialite who got along well with many other important figures in the capital city, and that had contributed greatly to Chu Hao's smooth progression up the ranks. As a result, Chu Hao often felt like he had to thank Song Gaofeng for teaching her that lesson. Otherwise, He would have been forced to deal with the full brunt of her unrestrained venom. Unbeknownst to everyone except Chu Hao, his wife was following him in secret on this trip, and she was staying in a confidential location in the nearby city. She had said to Chu Hao that Song Yuxiao could be spared, and that if he were to run away, then so be it. However, that scoundrel by the name of Song Fengshan had to be killed. Once he was dead and cremated, she would personally take his ashes in an urn to the grave of Song Gaofeng and his wife, then smash the urn in front of them, forcing them to witness the end of their lineage. There was truly no one more cruel than a woman scorned, but in Chu Hao's eyes this was a good thing. Chu Hao held onto the reins of his horse with one hand while shielding his eyes from the sun with the other as he continued to peer into the distance in a leisurely fashion. The official road here was very wide, and the terrain on either side of it was very flat and level, making it perfect for foot soldiers to march over, and even the cavalry could make a charge at any moment if need be. In Chu Hao's eyes, Song Yuxiao was just a senile old geezer who was used to reigning supreme in Watercombing Nation, but didn't have even half a clue when it came to battlefield tactics. Seeing as he was determined to perish with Sword Water Villa, Chu Hao was more than happy to grant him that wish. Chu Hao cast his gaze toward the old sword saint in the distance, and a mocking sneer appeared on his face as he lowered his hand to stroke the gold paper knife in his hand, one that had been awarded to him personally by the emperor, and he smiled as mused to himself, "It's a pity that such a valiant hero is going to meet his demise today. Of course, it's also a good thing that he showed up. Now, when people mention this event in the future, they'll speak of how I slew a sword saint." There were many legends of almighty heroes defying impossible odds to oppose mighty armies on their own, but unfortunately, those were only embellished stories. In this region there were around a dozen nations including Watercombing Nation, and there was no lack of formidable generals in those nations, ones that possessed incredible combat prowess. They were always seen leading their troops from the front, and if they had a powerful steed beneath them, then their powers would be enhanced even further, but in reality, there existed no one capable of opposing an entire army on their own. Chu Hao was not just some sheltered scholar. In fact, he was a veteran who had fought in countless battles, and never had he encountered anyone capable of such a miraculous feat. Song Yuxiao remained standing on the spot. Now that he had come here, he was unwilling to back down even a single step, but there was a hint of exasperation in his eyes as he turned to look back. "What the hell are you doing here, Chen Pingyan? This is no merry road trip." Chen Pingyan was carrying the sword case that contained subduing demons and eliminating fiends strapped tightly to his back. He jogged over to Song Yuxiao's side, and the latter turned to him with a frustrated expression. "Back at the waterside pavilion after your conflict with unruly Saber Villa, I told you that when journeying through the cultivation world, one is responsible for one's own life and death. Do you understand what that means, Chen Pingyan?" Chen Pingyan nodded in response. Song Yuxiao couldn't help but burst into exasperated laughter. "You don't know shit. In the cultivating world, there's danger at every turn. I didn't come here just to show my face, then immediately retreat as soon as the going gets tough. I'm here to make a final stand, and in the heat of battle, I won't be able to babysit you, do you understand?" Song Yuxiao was becoming more and more furious as he spoke, and in the end, he heaved a faint sigh as he concluded. "You shouldn't have come here, Chen Pingyan. Regardless of what you're planning to do today, I only have one job, and that's to ensure that you leave this place alive. That's it. I won't kill anyone," Chen Pingyan said. Then, he tilted his head for a moment and corrected himself. "At least, I'll try not to kill anyone." Song Yuxiao took a deep breath, doing his best to rein in his temper as he said, "Right now we are about to face an entire army. In the heat of battle, do you really think you can avoid killing just because you said so? Do you think this is a children's game? In an army, there are thousands of cavalry that can storm at you from all directions and endless foot soldiers to stand in your way, not to mention the thousands of archers taking aim at you, ready to let loose volleys of arrows at the drop of a hat. On top of that, there are around a dozen formidable cultivators directly under Chu Hao's command, as well as a group of master archers who can shoot with exceptional power and accuracy, all of whom are considered to be important assets to the imperial court when it comes to dealing with master martial artists and chi refiners. Even for someone like me, I won't be able to avoid severe injury if I get struck by an arrow in the vitals. If they're really that formidable, then have you come here just to surrender your own life?" Chen Pingyan asked. "I'm going to try and go after their general Chu Hao," Song Yuxiao explained. "I'm going to capture him before they have a chance to strike me down, and once I do that, this army will be without a leader. After that, I'll force Chu Hao to hand over that woman. If I'm on my own, my chances of success will be about 50%, but if you rush into battle with me, as soon as we get surrounded, you'll only become a burden to me. Listen to me and return to the villa right away. Then take your 2 friends and get as far away from this place as you can. Song Yushao raised his head to bask his face in the sunlight, and it was a bright and sunny summer's day, a perfect day to be making a final stand. A faint smile appeared on his face as he turned back to Qian Ping'an with a smile and said, I appreciate the gesture, Qian Ping'an, but regardless of whether I die here today or whether Swordwater Villa falls or survives, I can look back on my life and say that I have no regrets. Is that not enough? I'd say that's more than enough. Qian Ping'an patted the wine gourd strapped to his waist as he said with a bright smile, I'm not trying to boast, but when I run at full tilt, I'm definitely faster than all of those horses. On top of that, I have some life-saving trump cards up my sleeve so you don't have to worry about me. Just focus on taking down Chu Hao, and I can take care of myself. If I weren't capable of that, then I wouldn't have shown up today at all. Song Yushao's temper finally boiled over again, and he had to fight the urge to swat Qian Ping'an on the head as he yelled, Idiot! Do you really think that shitty little gourd of yours is a sword-nurturing gourd? Even if it is a legendary sword-nurturing gourd, how will it be of any use to you, a pure martial artist? Qian Ping'an adjusted his position so that he was standing behind Song Yushao, concealing himself from the opposing army, then patted the sword-nurturing gourd strapped to his waist as he said, Someone's looking down on you first. Why don't you come out and prove them wrong? Song Yushao was completely rooted to the spot. What the hell is he doing? Nothing's happening. A slightly awkward look appeared on Qian Ping'an's face as he called out, 15th. A streak of green sword light instantly flew out of the sword-nurturing gourd like lightning. It was a sleek and compact little sword that was glittering and translucent, and it emerged in between Qian Ping'an and Song Yushao, then began to slowly whiz around from side to side, as if it were seeking the approval of its master. At this point, Qian Ping'an was already well aware that out of the 2 swords in his sword-nurturing gourd, 15th was very gentle and obedient, following Qian Ping'an's every command, and it was like a sweet and caring pet. As for first, sometimes Qian Ping'an wasn't sure if he was its master or if it was his master. It refused to heed Qian Ping'an's call unless he was in life-threatening danger, or if there was something that caught its interest. However, Qian Ping'an had come to accept this, rather than yearning for First to be as obedient as First. At the very least, First had never defied him when it truly mattered. You're telling me this really is a sword-nurturing gourd? Song Yushao exclaimed with a stunned expression. Qian Ping'an merely gave a wide smile in response. However, the surprise on Song Yushao's face then faded as he reverted back to a solemn expression, patting Qian Ping'an on the shoulder as he said, You have an extremely bright future ahead, Qian Ping'an. Do not throw away your life for nothing here. Go. I'm already very touched that you decided to accompany me this far. The path ahead of you is a very smooth one, and you're blessed with powerful treasures, so you need to cherish your life even more. Get out of here and don't make me repeat myself again. Otherwise, I'm going to beat the crap out of you before that army even has a chance to get to you. Do you hear me? However, when it came to stubbornness, Song Yushao had met his match, and Qian Ping'an refused to back down as he declared in a solemn expression, I, Qian Ping'an, come from Clay Vase Alley of Locust Yellow County of the Greatly Empire's Dragon Spring Prefecture, and I'm on a journey to see what this world has to offer, so don't try to stop me. You're a hopeless idiot. Song Yushao exclaimed as he burst into laughter. Qian Ping'an took a step forward so that he was standing directly beside Song Yushao, then said, Also, I owe you a hot pot meal. Even though Song Yushao was looking into the distance, he was still concerned about Qian Ping'an, and he asked, Will you really be able to get away if things take a turn for the worse? Qian Ping'an nodded in response. Not only do I have my sword-nurturing gourd and flying swords to protect me, I made 20-inch movement talismans last night, so if I have to run, I guarantee that my speed will be unmatched, and I'll be impressing even myself. This sounded like a joke, but as Song Yushao turned to examine Qian Ping'an's expression, he found that the boy was completely serious. Song Yushao was very reassured to see this, and he gripped the hilt of his immovable as he declared, All right, then I'll be waiting for you to treat me to that hot pot meal. If we eat hot pot at the restaurant, can we bring our own wine? Qian Ping'an suddenly asked. Even though he had had a sword-nurturing gourd, a pair of flying swords, and a stack of inch movement talismans at his disposal, he was still the same stingy little miser that he had always been. Of course you can. Who's going to stop you? Song Yushao chortled, then rushed forward as he drew his sword out of his scabbard and declared, I'll be going on ahead. All you have to do is watch my back for me. On one side was a formidable army of 10,000, while on the other side were only 2 people. Despite how lopsided an affair this was, it was actually the army that was far more tense and nervous than their 2 opponents. In particular, some of the younger and less seasoned soldiers were trembling slightly from the tension in the air. In the face of just 2 opponents, All they had to do was wear them down into exhaustion and eventually death. There was no real need to strategize. The cavalry would lead the charge and form an encirclement, while the archers would provide support from afar, launching volleys of arrows to prevent Song Yuxiao from escaping. After that, the foot soldiers would storm onto the scene, with the front row of soldiers forming a barricade of shields, while the foot soldiers behind them attacked with long spears through the gaps between the shields. Aside from the standard bows used by the archers in the army, there were also several dozen divine bows that had been taken from Watercombing Nation's imperial vault. These divine bows had been crafted by Mahist artisans, and they had always been given to the best archers that the army had to offer. The tips of the arrows used had cloud runes engraved upon them, while the shafts of the arrows were crafted from iron essence, while the fletching was fashioned from golden falcon feathers. Each arrow was extremely sturdy and heavy, making them too unwieldy for the average archer. Only exceptional martial artists possessed the strength required to fully draw these bows, and the arrows shot from these bows were far faster, more powerful, more accurate, and went farther than arrows shot from the average bow. Last but not least, there were 20 formidable cultivators gathered around Chu Hao to form a protective encirclement. With all these obstacles standing in Song Yuxia's way, getting to Chu Hao was going to be no less difficult than ascending to the heavens. Chu Hao knew that victory was firm within his grasp. Just the 3,000 elite cavalry from his personal army alone would have been more than enough to deal with Song Yuxiao, and they were battle-hardened veterans who were fearless and willing to tackle the enemy head-on. However, that didn't mean that the rest of the troops would also be so fearless. As a seasoned veteran himself, Chu Hao was well aware of this. Hence, for this particular battle, any soldier that was to perish would receive a staggering 100 taels of silver from the imperial court as reparations, and everyone in the clan that the deceased soldier belonged to would also be exempt from compulsory military service for a decade. However, anyone who dared to flee or desert the battle would be executed on the spot, and their clans would be banished from Watercombing Nation entirely. With such a strong incentive for participation and an equally great punishment for deserting, the soldiers had no choice but to prepare to fight to the death. Chu Hao was straddled atop his horse beneath a majestic flag, looking completely confident and assured. There was no way that a single man could possibly oppose an entire army, and the emperor had already promised him in private that he could take half of the wealth of Sword Water Villa to issue rewards to the troops of this army, while the other half would be taken by the imperial treasury. However, Chu Hao would have to cover the rest of the expenses of this march, and he was not permitted to turn to the Ministry of War or the Ministry of Revenue for financial aid. Even so, Chu Hao was confident that he would still be able to profit immensely after the Sword Water Villa was stripped. Instead of rising up into the air and making himself a sitting duck for all of the opposing archers, Song Yuxiao leaned forward and lowered his center of gravity, then charged forward like lightning toward the uniform line of elite cavalry that formed the vanguard of Chu Hao's army. The first volley of arrows came raining down from the sky, and the entire area was abuzz with the sound of countless twanging bow strings. Song Yuxiao stomped a foot heavily down onto the ground, launching himself forward at such an incredible speed that it was becoming difficult to even track him with the naked eye. At the same time, he spun around as he slashed his sword through the air, and a burst of tremendous sword chi emerged within a radius of several dozen feet around him, erupting in all directions. The ground behind Song Yuxiao was instantly riddled with arrows, while the arrows that were on course to strike him were all shattered by the sword chi around him. He was displaying extraordinary speed and extremely formidable sword chi, much to the shock and awe of the opposing army, but the troops remained unfazed as the next volley of arrows was fired in an orderly fashion. Song Yuxiao spun around like a spinning top with a movable held before him, and thousands of immovables instantly appeared all around him, all of which had their tips pointing outward. In the blink of an eye, he had conjured up thousands of streaks of sword chi, and he thrust a finger up at the heavens as he roared, "Go!" With a stomp of his foot, all of the sword chi in a semicircle around him shot through the air, hurtling toward the row of oncoming lance-wielding cavalry that was leading the charge. In the blink of an eye, dozens of horse legs were severed, and around 20 horses were decapitated altogether, plunging the entire line of cavalry into complete disarray. Meanwhile, immovable rose up into the heavens, and streaks of sword chi continued to fan out across the surrounding area like a giant umbrella. All of the arrows that struck this umbrella were instantly pulverized as if they were fragile eggs that had been dashed against a rock. 2 elite cavalry units were accelerating in their forward charge from either flank, tilting themselves sideways atop their steeds to shoot arrows diagonally at Song Yuxiao. The remaining semicircle of sword chi behind Song Yuxiao immediately shot forth as well, and several dozen more horses in these 2 elite cavalry units were slain on the spot, while the soldiers riding atop those horses were sent flying through the air. However, these were clearly all extremely well-trained soldiers, and very few of them fell unconscious from the impact of falling off their steeds. The majority of them either drifted lightly onto the ground or quickly clambered to their feet, drawing their blades and charging directly at Song Yuxiao. Just the title of Water-Combing Nation Sword Saint alone wasn't going to be anywhere near enough to intimidate these elite troops, all of whom had crawled out from under piles of bodies on the battlefield on countless occasions. Out of the dozen or so nations in the western region of Eastern Treasured Vile Continent, Colorful Garment Nation had the greatest number of troops, so on paper, it had the most formidable military. In particular, it held a significant advantage over the other nations when it came to the number of cavalry. However, in terms of actual combat prowess, it was far lacking compared with Ancient Elm Nation, which was renowned for the ferocity of its foot soldiers, Pine Stream Nation, which had the best cavalry and archers, and Water-Combing Nation, which had the toughest and most valiant people. In contrast, the border army of Colorful Garment Nation was just a bloated unit of incompetent troops. Once upon a time, a formidable general with the Ma surname had emerged in Colorful Garment Nation military, but his superiors essentially forced him to move to the Blusher Prefecture out of envy, and he lived out the rest of his days there. In light of Colorful Garment Nation's obvious military incompetence, it had become a very alluring piece of free real estate for the three nations that directly neighbored it. Chu Hao had volunteered to lead this army against Sword Water Villa, not just to settle a personal vendetta for his wife. Instead, the main reason was actually because he wanted to claim the position of general of the army that would eventually be sent to conquer Colorful Garment Nation. If he could successfully bring down Sword Water Villa, then that would lend him greater authority and acclaim in the imperial court. Otherwise, even if the emperor wanted to select him for the role, he would undoubtedly be met with resistance from some more seasoned generals with more accolades to their name. If he could slay the Sword Saint on top of eliminating Sword Water Villa, then that would contribute significantly to furthering his agenda. Surrounded by his formidable army, Chu Hao was completely safe, and with that in mind, he couldn't help but think to himself, even the heavens are on my side. Kill as many as you please, Song Yuxiao. Let's see what you're going to do once you're completely worn down. Soon, I'll be leading an almighty border army of over 100,000 troops on a northbound march, and I'll be the one to claim top honors for the eradication of Colorful Garment Nation. When that time comes, there's a very good chance that I'll be able to claim one of the 10 spots among the generals of the decade, adjudged by Lakeview Academy. Song Chongjing of the Great Li Empire is nothing more than a northern savage who only reached his current position thanks to his imperial ties. In terms of actual strategic acumen and competence when leading an army, he's nothing compared with me. Chu Hao unconsciously tightened his grip around his golden paper cutter, as the smile on his face grew even wider, and he could already envision his imminent meteoric rise. Meanwhile, Song Yuxiao had successfully withstood the second volley of arrows fired at him by Chu Hao's cavalry, and at this point, he was already no more than 50 meters away from the line of cavalry. Given the speed at which he was advancing, the cavalry had already given up on firing more arrows at him, and they had adopted the formation-shattering setup that couldn't have been more familiar to them as they stormed at Song Yuxiao with unstoppable might. All of a sudden, a sense of foreboding welled up in Song Yuxiao's heart, and he sprang several meters to the side while charging forward, allowing him to evade an arrow that had come flying at him with extraordinary speed. That arrow had been far more formidable than the normal arrows fired at him in the volleys from the cavalry, and 3 more of those arrows were fired at him in rapid succession, but he was able to successfully evade them every single time. At the same time, he thrust his joint index and middle fingers upward, and immovable came plummeting out of the heavens at his behest. As for the blade-wielding cavalry who had tumbled down from the backs of their fallen steeds, they were prepared to lay down their lives, but none of them were able to land a single blow on Song Yuxiao, and all of them felt as if he were simply gliding past them in a wraith-like manner. Immovable continued to plunge forward like a flood dragon powering through a river, severing the legs of several horses in the blink of an eye. The sword seemed determined to open up a path for its owner to advance freely, and it was hurtling forward with unstoppable force, plunging straight through all of the horses in its path. A trail of fallen horses and cavalry were left in its wake, immediately following which a wraith-like figure would glide through the chaos in a graceful and carefree manner. Song Yuxiao was slicing through the elite cavalry in his path like a sharp blade, and after successfully piercing through the line of cavalry, he was met with a mountainous wall of shields that were spread out before him in a line. The spear tips protruding out of the gaps between the shields were all shimmering with a menacing gleam, and the length of these spears was around 1.5 times the height of a grown man. The combination of shields and spears formed an impregnable fortress that was also capable of lethal retaliation, and it seemed that there was no way to bypass it. If he were to leap high up into the sky to attack Chu Hao from above, then he would be sure to be shot full of holes by the array of archers standing behind the wall of shields and spears. Due to how quickly Song Yuxiao had been advancing earlier, the archers were rendered largely useless, but that certainly didn't mean that they would remain ineffective for the rest of the battle. In particular, the archers wielding the prized Mahis divine bows were sure to play an important role going forward. Song Yuxiao forcibly drew in a fresh breath, and his qi instantly began to surge violently throughout his entire body. Right at this moment, several top cultivators of Water-Combing Nation who had pledged their allegiance to the imperial court launched themselves into the air off the heads and shoulders of the foot soldiers in front of them. They were concealed behind the wall of shields, so Song Yuxiao was unable to see them, and they were pouncing on this interval where Song Yuxiao was out of breath to make their move, lashing out at him with formidable weapons. Instead of backing down in the face of these mighty adversaries, Song Yuxiao sprang forward without any hesitation, sweeping his long sword horizontally through the air. Even though they had perfect timing to capitalize on Song Yuxiao pausing to draw a breath and replenish his qi, they had never faced a 6th-tier swordsman in battle before, and they failed to anticipate just how quickly a swordsman of this caliber was able to replenish the air in his lungs. 1. In the blink of an eye, 3 4th-tier lesser grandmasters were chopped in half by the oncoming streak of crescent-shaped sword qi. They had met their demise before they had even had a chance to play any role in the battle, and one couldn't help but wonder if they had died filled with regrets. After slaying these lesser grandmasters, Song Yuxiao slashed downward without pause. 4 or 5 of the armor-clad foot soldiers in front of him, as well as several of the soldiers behind them, were instantly torn apart by the streak of devastating sword qi, together with their armor and weapons. Blood and scattered remains instantly splattered onto armor of the nearby foot soldiers, but this was a very well-trained and experienced unit. More foot soldiers instantly charged forward from the rear to fill the hole that Song Yuxiao had just pierced into their ranks, while the other foot soldiers on either side of the hole also closed in to fill the gaps. Those who didn't fear death weren't guaranteed to survive on the battlefield, but those who did fear death often found themselves suffering the very fate that they frantically tried to avoid. In the brief moment that it took for the hole in the formation of foot soldiers to be filled, Song Yuxiao was able to catch a glimpse of just how deep the formation was, and he couldn't help but heave an internal sigh. However, his fighting spirit didn't waver in the slightest as he sprang up into the air before slashing his sword through the air once again, severing several rows of spears at the forefront of the opposing formation. At the same time, he abruptly tightened his grip around the hilt of his sword, and his unbridled sword intent erupted out of his body. It was as if he were wielding a full moon that was glowing with dazzling radiance, threatening to steal the limelight from the sun up above. With a thunderous roar, he rose up over 3 meters further into the air, and his sword intent and sword qi swelled drastically in unison. The moon that he was wielding was originally only the size of a jade plate, but it abruptly expanded dramatically to encompass his entire body, keeping all of the oncoming arrows at bay as he flew directly toward Chu Hao from above. Upon striking the shining moon, all of the arrows would have their tips chipped and their shafts snapped. While the entire army's attention was focused on Song Yuxiao, Qian Pingan wasn't just standing around. Instead, he also rushed forward with the speed and agility of a nimble rabbit. The cavalry of Chu Hao's army naturally weren't going to turn around. Doing so would only cause disruption to the formation of foot soldiers. They remained in place, and Qian Pingan was forced to bear the full brunt of their fury. While it was almost to be expected that the almighty sword saint of Water-Combing Nation would be able to pierce through their ranks, no one could have anticipated that this unknown young boy would also be so difficult to deal with. He was extraordinarily fast, able to cover 10 meters with every single stride, and he was also infuriatingly agile, managing to successfully evade a volley of arrows along with 4 or 5 Mahist arrows fired at him from very sharp angles. As for the arrows that he was unable to evade, he would simply brush them aside with his hands. Before long, he had already rushed into the ranks of the cavalry like a slippery eel, traversing through the tiniest of gaps in the opposing formation. During the occasional instances where he was forced to face an enemy directly, he would either throw a punch into the horse's side to send both horse and rider flying 10 meters through the air, or ram his shoulder into the oncoming horse to achieve the same outcome. After that, he would gently spring up into the air, launching himself off the horse's back with the grace and finesse of a dragonfly skimming over water. In the blink of an eye, he would already be gone, leaving behind nothing more than a gentle breeze in his wake. All of the cavalry that he passed by would lash out with their blades and spears, but none of them were able to even graze his clothes. In their eyes, he was definitely a grandmaster martial artist who was at least at the pinnacle of the 4th tier, perhaps even a 5th-tier martial artist. A lance-wielding cavalry carefully took aim at Qian Pingan's neck, then thrust the lance upward violently with unbridled killing intent. Qian Pingan cocked his head to the side to just barely evade the oncoming lance, and at the same time, he reached out to grab onto the shaft. The lance was a prized weapon that had been passed down in the soldier's family for generations, but despite his best efforts, it was still wrenched out of his grasp, leaving the flesh on his hand torn and bloodied. Qian Pingyan adjusted the lance while in midair so that he was holding onto it with both hands, then plunged it deep into the ground. The lance was remarkably flexible, and it bent in a massive arc before catapulting Qian Pingyan close to 20 meters up into the sky with a dull twang. Even as he was launched into the air, Qian Pingyan was still holding onto one end of the lance instead of leaving it behind. All of the cavalry that he had left behind could only look on as he flew through the air like a wind-riding immortal before landing on a patch of empty land directly behind their ranks. Upon landing on the ground, Qian Pingyan took a step back without pause, then swung his arm through the air with all his might to hurl the lance up into the sky. After that, he patted the wine gourd strapped to his waist as he sprang up into the air, and in the next instant, he vanished into thin air without any warning. It was as if he had used some type of land-shortening mystical ability, and all of the cavalry looked on in shock and awe as he appeared atop the lance an instant later. He was standing on the lance with one foot in front of the other, just like how legendary sword immortals rode atop their flying swords, presenting an awe-inspiring sight to behold. If it weren't for the fact that they were in opposing camps, they would have been unable to resist the urge to cheer him on. Immediately thereafter, an even more infuriating sight unfolded. Not only was Qian Pingyan flying through the air atop his newly acquired lance, he had removed the wine gourd from his waist and was taking a swig of wine, even as he was surrounded by throngs of enemies. All of the onlookers were incensed to see this, but deep down, they couldn't help but feel a sense of admiration. Both Song Yuxiao and Qian Pingyan were advancing deep into enemy territory, but they were doing so in completely different ways. The former was slicing through the enemy ranks with his unmatched sword qi, cutting down enemies with every single slash of his sword, whereas Qian Pingyan hadn't killed a single person thus far. All he did was follow Song Yuxiao like a shadow, and he was waltzing into the enemy camp as casually as if he were taking a stroll in the park. Due to the incredible speed at which the lance was traveling and the unexpected nature of this turn of events, the enemy archers were momentarily rooted to the spot. However, the commanders in the army quickly snapped back to their senses and began barking orders, instructing the strongest archers to intercept Qian Pingyan by shooting their bows with incredibly high draw weight. Of course, the archers wielding Mahis divine bows were also among them, and a fierce storm of lightning-fast arrows were sent hurtling toward Qian Pingyan. While everyone was still reeling at what they were seeing, they soon found themselves even more astonished as two resplendent streaks of light, one white and one green, suddenly shot out of Qian Pingyan's red wine gourd before striking and shattering all of the oncoming arrows. Qian Pingyan didn't need to take any evasive measures at all, and the crisis was averted in virtually the blink of an eye. After flying for a good 200 meters, the lance had already begun its descent. Qian Pingyan launched himself up into the air, allowing the lance to crash down to the ground. He did so just in time to evade an attack from a top-tier swordsman of water-combing nation, and the swordsman landed on the ground before turning back to glower at Qian Pingyan with a look of frustration and indignation on his face. Earlier, he had been completely powerless to stand against Song Yuxiao's tremendous sword qi, but that was only to be expected. Yet now, he had completely failed to even graze a no-name young boy with his attack. How was he supposed to live with himself? As a formidable swordsman of Chu Hao's army, he sat on an elevated pedestal, enjoying far greater benefits than the average soldier. Yet now that it was time for him to do his job, he had failed in humiliating fashion. Further up ahead, Song Yuxiao was no more than 200 meters away from Chu Hao. At this point, the ball of sword qi around him had already been worn down significantly by the countless arrows and spears that it had withstood, not to mention that the attacks that had been thrown at him by the dozen or so powerful cultivators directly under Chu Hao's command. Right at this moment, a streak of green sword qi came hurtling toward Song Yuxiao with unstoppable might, and it was finally able to breach the barrier of sword qi around him. However, it was met by Song Yuxiao's immovable sword, and was split in half before sweeping past him, instantly killing dozens of foot soldiers behind him on the spot. Song Yuxiao withdrew his sword as a line of blood trickled down from the corner of his lips. This time he didn't dare to relax and replenish his qi. At the very least, the person who had attacked him just now had to be a fifth-tier swordsman, so it was not someone that he could afford to take lightly. At this moment, that person was standing right beside Chu Hao. He was dressed in a green robe with one hand clasped behind his back, while the other hand was holding his sword with the tip aimed directly at Song Yuxiao. The man didn't appear to be very old, seemingly only in his early 30s, but he could just as well be over 40. Upon closer inspection, Song Yuxiao discovered that the man wasn't even wielding a sword. Instead, it was a well-polished piece of green bamboo the length of a normal sword. He was standing atop his saddle rather than sitting on it. This made him appear significantly taller than Chu Hao, but the latter didn't seem to mind. The swordsman turned to Chu Hao with a smile as he said, "That sword of Song Yushao's has quite a nice bamboo scabbard. Would you be able to give it to me, General Chu?" "Why not?" Chu Hao immediately replied in a generous manner. "Forget the scabbard, you can have the sword as well if you want." The swordsman shook his head with a smile as he replied, "There's no need for that. Immovable is Song Yushao's personal sword, so if you can offer it up to your emperor, then that would be a symbolic representation of the martial arts world bowing its head to the imperial court." An enlightened look appeared on Chu Hao's face, and he immediately burst into laughter. "How thoughtful of you, green bamboo sword immortal." Song Yushao was standing on a small patch of empty ground that had been vacated by all of the surrounding foot soldiers, and the green bamboo sword immortal declared, "Sword Saint Song, the instant that you draw your next breath will be the instant that you meet your demise." Song Yushao's expression remained unchanged, while a loud commotion rang out from behind him. Chu Hao's eyes narrowed slightly as he pulled what appeared to be a silver ingot out of his sleeve, and he clutched it in the palm of his hand. Moments later, a pair of old men with white hair emerged beside him. One of the old men was wearing a brocade robe. Between his index and middle fingers, he held an azure talisman that had golden text inscribed upon it. The other one had a burly and imposing physique, and he was wielding a pair of axes with cloud designs engraved upon them. Neither of them was wearing armor, and it was clear that they weren't soldiers of Chu Hao's army. Both of them cast their eyes toward Song Yushao, and in contrast with the calm confidence that the green bamboo sword immortal was exuding, the two old men were a little apprehensive. Both of them were formidable chi refiners who were also guest elders of Water Combing Nation's imperial clan, and they were aware of just how fearsome a sixth-tier swordsman could be, particularly when the swordsman in question was prepared to lay down his life to make one final stand. "I need one of you to help the green bamboo sword immortal slay Song Yushao as quickly as possible, while the other one keeps that boy at bay," Chu Hao instructed. The burly axe-wielding man strode toward Song Yushao with a cold smile on his face as he declared, "I'll force the old bastard to breathe and replenish his chi." Meanwhile, a wry smile appeared on the brocade-robed old man's face as he gently tossed forward the azure paper talisman that he had treasured for many years. Despite his reluctance to part with the talisman, he had no choice but to do so in the face of such a formidable foe. After rising up into the air, the talisman vanished in the blink of an eye. Immediately thereafter, a burst of golden light erupted out of thin air roughly 150 meters away, and a giant warrior clad in a suit of golden armor landed on the ground with a resounding boom. The warrior stood at over 7 meters tall, towering over the surrounding foot soldiers, and it was wielding a huge halberd. There was no actual body encased within the suit of golden armor, only streaks of silver light that were moving around incessantly. Qian Pingan continued to charge forward, and it appeared as if he was running on air, but in reality he was using 1st and 15th as stepping stones to pave the way forward. Qian Pingan was most definitely a very dogmatic and stubborn person, but he had actually changed quite a bit ever since he had begun traveling the world on his own. The golden-armored warrior was holding its huge halberd in one hand, and it was scrutinizing Qian Pingan intently, preparing to lash out as soon as he was within range, but Qian Pingan remained completely unfazed. Back in the Blusher Prefecture, Daoist Chong Miao had summoned a pair of copper-armored warriors to protect himself in battle, and if Qian Pingan recalled correctly, even the best copper-armored talismanic warriors were only comparable in power to third-tier martial artists. By Qian Pingan's estimates, this golden-armored warrior had to be at least comparable with a 4th-tier martial artist, perhaps even a 5th-tier one. Of course, there was no way that this would be enough to make him back down. Even back when he was first practicing fist techniques, he had possessed the courage to take on the old mountain-moving ape of Sun-Scorched Mountain on his own, so this glorified puppet certainly wasn't going to strike fear into his heart. In a gesture that was almost completely instinctively, Qian Pingan reached out to grab onto the hilt of his locust wood sword. At the same time he instructed internally, "First 15th, go help Senior Song deal with those two. I'll take on this thing on my own." At no more than 20 meters away from the golden-armored warrior, the two flying swords beneath Qian Pingan's feet darted away, one to the left and one to the right, flying past the golden-armored warrior that was now charging at their master. Qian Pingan leaped up into the air while his hand remained locked around the hilt of his locust wood sword, and he yelled, "You'll be fine, Senior Song, I'll make sure of that, so breathe whenever you're ready." The burly old man was charging at Song Yushao with his axes raised, while the green bamboo sword immortal was waiting to pounce, but there was a confident smile on Song Yushao's face, and he placed his full trust in Qian Pingan as he drew a full breath. The green bamboo sword immortal immediately pounced on that opportunity to lash out with his sword. Meanwhile, Qian Pinyin continued to fly through the air while murmuring to himself in a voice that was audible only to himself, and he found himself in an unprecedented immersive state where his mind was completely empty, and his heart was focused fully on his sword. Back in the ancient temple, Mr. Qi had managed to slice through the golden light formation of that pink-robed great demon with ease with a single slash of the locust wood sword. Seeing as he still wasn't ready to emulate that sword strike, he decided that he would take things slowly, just as he did in his fist technique practice. There would inevitably come a day when he threw his millionth punch, and everything would fall into place. All he was focused on was moving his sword, and he was determined to pierce through anything in his path, whether that be mountains or rivers. He channeled 18 stops technique with all his might, and the sword chi within his body surged forth like floodwaters through a broken dam, passing through a series of acupoints normally seen as not worth cultivating for the majority of swordsmen. In the next instant, Qian Pinyin forcefully drew his locust wood sword, unleashing a burst of resplendent sword chi that he was unable to see as he slashed his sword at the giant golden armored warrior. The golden armored warrior was instantly sliced apart along with its massive halberd. Qian Pinyin landed on both feet, then raised his head just in time to see a huge rift appear diagonally across the golden armored warrior. Dazzling silver light erupted out of the rift as the warrior's golden armor fell apart, falling to the ground in a heap. Qian Pinyin's knees remained slightly bent, and he was sweating profusely with a slightly dazed look on his face, but he quickly snapped back to his senses as he stood up straight again with his locust wood sword held tightly in his hand. Never had he felt so exhilarated, and all he wanted was to yell out to express his emotions. In the face of the formidable army, he raised his locust wood sword as he declared at the top of his lungs, "I am Qian Pinyin of the Greatly Empire." 1. The original says something along the lines of exchanging breath. This refers to the fact that the short moment between exhaling and inhaling is a natural moment of weakness, and it's impossible to fully mobilize one's muscles during the inhalation because the core has to be at least partially relaxed to allow the diaphragm to descend. This concept is even more important in internal martial arts. In order to draw in and circulate qi properly, deep abdominal breathing is absolutely necessary. For this reason, this is often translated as replenishing qi. However, it takes a normal human around 2 seconds, and a lot of things can happen in a fight in 2 seconds. His declaration was met with dead silence. All of the enemy troops surrounding Qian Pinyin were momentarily rooted to the spot before erupting into a flurry of action. They weren't just gathered around Qian Pinyin to watch his heroics. Instead, all of them had prepared their spears and raised their bows, aiming them directly at what they perceived to be a young sword immortal. In the face of such immense pressure, Qian Pinyin did something quite unusual. He placed his locust wood sword back into his sword case with his left hand while removing his wine gourd from his waist with his left, then raised his left hand up high as if he were saying to the army of watercombing nation, "Please wait a moment while I have a drink." This instantly created a huge stir in the surrounding troops, and even the experienced and capable commanders in the army couldn't help but exchange a few bewildered glances. Could it really be that this young boy was a sword immortal capable of opposing an entire army on his own? This entire time, he had been nothing but the embodiment of grace and nonchalance, strolling through the enemy ranks without a care in the world. All of the soldiers felt utterly humiliated, and they didn't know how to proceed. They couldn't just throw more people at him, knowing full well that anyone who stood in his path would most likely be killed. While it was true that 100 taels of silver in reparations was a huge sum, these soldiers were the closest of comrades, and they were practically brothers. No one wanted to see their brothers turn into piles of cold and lifeless silver. 1st and 15th had already done their part to further contribute to the air of invincibility that Qian Pinyin was exuding, and they had now moved on to assist Song Yuxiao. The green bamboo sword immortal's sword strike swept directly toward Song Yuxiao's sword chi like a turbulent wave, but it was opposed by 1st, which managed to chip away at the attack bit by bit until it vanished. Meanwhile, the axe-wielding militarian cultivator of Watercombing Nation had his hands full dealing with 15th, which was whizzing around him at an extraordinary speed. The burly old man had no intention of sacrificing himself to bring down Song Yuxiao, and he hurriedly went on the defensive, constantly moving around his axes around like a pair of shields to defend himself against 15th. A string of loud clangs were ringing out incessantly around him, while trails of sparks were flying from his axes as he frantically kept 15th at bay. Song Yuxiao took advantage of this opportunity to draw in a new breath, and his sword intent swelled drastically as his black robes flapped and swayed despite the absence of wind. Thanks to Qian Pinyin's help, he had managed to avert a severe crisis and was raring to go again. While raising his hand as a smokescreen to distract the surrounding troops, Qian Pinyin instructed internally, "First, 15th, keep harassing your opponents. You can use some tricks to intimidate them if you like." First was more than happy to heed Qian Pingan's call, sticking to the green bamboo sword immortal like glue while attacking him relentlessly. 15th also continued its rapid-fire assault, and much to the burly old man's dismay and indignation, his prized axes were quickly riddled with pits and indentations from 15th's relentless strikes. The green bamboo sword immortal possessed superior cultivation base and a keener eye than all of his peers, and as he was warding off First's attacks, a furious look appeared on his face as he yelled, "You fools! He's not actually drinking wine. He's just using that to disguise the moments where he's drawing breaths." Opportunities to strike down a swordsman as formidable as Song Yuxiao were very difficult to create, and one such opportunity had just been foiled by Qian Pingan's meddling influence. At this point, Qian Pingan had already returned his sword-nurturing gourd to his waist, and he leaped over the formation of foot soldiers while giving the green bamboo sword immortal a cheeky grin. Song Yuxiao chortled with mirth. The brocade-robed old man certainly wasn't expecting his trump card to be struck down so easily, and he could only give a wry smile as he pulled out 3 more azure talismans. Unfortunately, none of them had golden runes inscribed upon them. Instead, one was written in silver runes, while the other 2 were inscribed in red. He tossed the 3 talismans forward, producing 3 more talismanic warriors, 1 silver and 2 copper. The 3 talismanic warriors landed on the ground beside one another with a resounding thump, positioning themselves in front of Chu Hao. By the time Song Yuxiao and Qian Pingan arrived before Chu Hao, the roles had completely switched, and the 2 of them had turned from prey into hunters. If it hadn't been for Qian Pingan, Song Yuxiao would have already perished in this battle, but thanks to his impact, Song Yuxiao had actually managed to gain a slight upper hand. Thus far, Chu Hao's military career had spanned over more than half his life. During this time, he had fought in over 30 battles without suffering a single defeat, and he possessed sufficient prudence to see that the tide of the battle was turning against him. At this point, the confident smile on his face had faded, and he covertly injected his true qi into the silver ingot-like treasure in his hand. The treasure was an armor pellet, and it was the most valuable piece in his wife's dowry. The armor pellet instantly spread over the suit of armor that Chu Hao was already wearing like a layer of mercury, transforming the suit of black armor into one that was bright white in color and decorated with cloud patterns. This suit of armor was called the Divine Dew-Bearing Armor, and was colloquially referred to as Dew Armor by cultivators. Even though this was only a militarian armor pellet of the lowest caliber, not a single other general from any of the other dozen or so nearby nations possessed such a treasure. Of course, this wasn't because they were too poor to afford one. Instead, it was simply because there was no supply to meet the demand. Otherwise, countless generals would be more than willing to pay 1,500 snowflake coins for an armor pellet, and even if that price were doubled, there would still be many generals clamoring to sell everything that they owned in order to buy one. 3,000 snowflake coins equated to 300,000 taels of silver, and that was certainly a steep price for anything but a treasure that could save their lives. The military and cultivators had a monopoly on armor pellets, while chi refiners outside of swordsmen were lacking in their bodily refinement compared with military and cultivators, so they were even more eager to get their hands on armor pellets. As a result, barely any armor pellets slipped through the cracks to fall into the hands of pure martial artists. Song Yuxiao recommenced his forward charge, and now that he didn't have to watch his own back, he was advancing more freely than ever. Meanwhile, Qian Pingan covered a distance of over 7 meters with just a single stride as he instructed. "Come back." First reluctantly ceased its harassment of the green bamboo sword immortal as it slowly flew back to Qian Pingan, and it was clearly not very happy. In contrast, 15th returned to Qian Pingan in an instant, whizzing around him to protect him from all of the oncoming spears and arrows. Standing on the back of his horse, the green bamboo sword immortal heaved a faint sigh as he took a longing glance at the bamboo scabbard strapped to Song Yuxiao's waist. After that, he leaned back, then launched himself off the back of his horse, then turned around in midair as he continued to dart away into the distance, using the heads of the soldiers behind him as stepping stones. In the blink of an eye, he had already completely separated himself from Chu Hao's army, and he returned the length of green bamboo in his hand back to his belt as he slowly made his way toward the city. As he did so, he turned back to take a glance at the battlefield as he mused to himself in a forlorn voice. "Looks like I won't be able to get my hands on that bamboo scabbard anytime soon. If Song Yuxiao manages to survive this ordeal, he'll surely be able to live for 2 or 3 more decades." With the green bamboo sword immortal fleeing from the battle, a sense of panic immediately began to set in among the army. There was a perplexed look on Chu Hao's face as he cast his gaze toward the troops that had been recruited from the border armies of Water-Combing Nation. These soldiers in particular were in a complete state of disarray. Theoretically speaking, things shouldn't have been so chaotic. While it was true that these soldiers were far inferior in combat prowess compared with the troops from Chu Hao's personal army, they had endured many battles on the borders, so they shouldn't have been so incompetent. That was when Chu Hao spotted one of the generals of the border armies. He wasn't doing anything to try and control his disorganized troops. Instead, he was merely straddled atop his steed with his arms crossed as if he were nothing more than a passive observer. Chu Hao was furious to see this, and he gritted his teeth tightly as he fought back the urge to rush over to that general and hack him to pieces with his sword. All of a sudden, Chu Hao's expression changed drastically as he rose up from the saddle of his horse to look around. In doing so, he discovered that the resolute and unyielding wall of foot soldiers had become an obstacle standing in the path of his 3,000 elite cavalry, preventing them from being able to circle back around to protect him. Without the green bamboo sword immortal to worry about, all Song Yuxiao had to contend with were the axe-wielding old man and the talismanic warrior summoned by the brocade-robed old man. He was able to hold off these opponents with relative ease, even having the spare capacity to observe Chu Hao while locked in battle. Chen Pingyan was gradually coming to realize that something wasn't quite right. The fast and powerful attacks of the foot soldiers were gradually slowing down, and the number of spears and arrows flying his way was slowly decreasing. In the end, all that the foot soldiers did was passively observe, as if they had nothing to do with this battle. Furthermore, Chen Pingyan could see a number of commanders and generals constantly moving around their troops, seemingly issuing certain instructions to them. With a single slash of his sword, Song Yuxiao was able to slice a copper-armored puppet into two, and it instantly reverted back to its talisman form before disintegrating into ashes. With another slash of his sword, Song Yuxiao raised a trail of sparks over the burly old man's huge axes. The scraps of metal scraped off the pair of axes flew in all directions as scorching hot sparks, clattering audibly against the suits of armor worn by the nearby soldiers. It was clear that Song Yuxiao's opponents were no match for him, and it was only a matter of time before they were defeated. After forcing back the axe-wielding military cultivator, Song Yuxiao pointed the tip of his sword straight at Chu Hao as he declared, "I've come all this way to invite General Chu Hao alone to come and visit our villa. There's no need for bloodshed from anyone else, but if you insist on standing in my way, then I regret to inform you that my immovable may not be so forgiving." All of a sudden, a resounding boom rang out not far away from Chu Hao's direction. As it turned out, while everyone was distracted by Song Yuxiao, Chen Pingyan had already made it to no more than 50 meters away from Chu Hao, while the dozen or so formidable martial artists in his path were slowly forced back further and further. After assigning 1st and 15th with the task of watching his back, he used an inch movement talisman to pass straight through the miniature battlefield where Song Yuxiao and the two Qi refiners were locked in battle, appearing no more than 10 meters away from Chu Hao. From there, he lunged forward, stomping heavily down onto the ground and slamming his right fist into the head of Chu Hao's horse. The horse's head instantly shattered, as did its two front legs. For all of Chu Hao's talent as a general on the battlefield, he was actually only a third-tier martial artist, and as he tipped forward, he was struck by Chen Pingyan's left fist. All of the spiritual energy within his suit of dew armor instantly converged toward the spot that had just been struck by Chen Pingyan's fist, but he was still seen flying back through the air, falling about 15 meters away and raising a large cloud of dust. Chen Pingyan continued to charge forward, and one of Chu Hao's personal guards immediately rushed forward on horseback. He put on an excellent display of horsemanship as he tugged on the reins at just the right time for his steed to rear up on its hind legs and stomp down upon Chen Pingyan's head with its front hooves. Chen Pingyan abruptly accelerated, then ducked down to evade the horse's flailing hooves. He then instantly straightened up again, ramming his shoulder straight into the horse's belly. As a result, the horse was launched off its hooves and sent flying backward. Immediately, Chen Pingyan launched himself forward off both feet, much like he had done when jumping over the creek back in the small town. Chu Hao had only just struggled to his feet when he was struck by another punch, this time to his head. His suit of dew armor glowed radiantly, but he still fell back and toppled to the ground in an unconscious state. Just a moment ago, Chu Hao had been envisioning his imminent instatement as one of the continent's top 10 generals, yet now, he was being lifted up by Chen Pingyan by the scruff of his neck like a little bunny. Chen Pingyan hefted the unconscious general up to the height of his own shoulder, then shook him around a little with a wide smile as he yelled at Song Yuxiao, "I've caught him, Senior Song." At this point, the battle was already decided, and the two Imperial Qi refiners exchanged a resigned glance with one another. Instead of continuing to press his advantage, Song Yuxiao returned his sword to its scabbard, then cupped his fist in an apologetic salute toward the pair of Qi refiners as he said, "My apologies. Please pass on a message to His Majesty for me, Tell him that I'm willing to accept any punishment he decides to hand down upon myself and my sword water villa. After that, he charged forward, and his sword chi fell like rain, severing the legs of all of the horses of Chu Hao's personal guards to prevent them from getting to Chen Ping'an. Upon landing beside Chen Ping'an, he said, "Go. We'll be safe as soon as we return to the villa. This army is already completely disheartened and won't pose any threat to us in the near future." All of the foot soldiers in the army were looking on in complete silence. Only now did the cavalry from Chu Hao's personal army finally realize what had happened, and they began to circle around under the leadership of a commander. The foot soldiers didn't dare to directly oppose the cavalry, and they slowly split apart down the middle, doing their best to open up a path wide enough for the cavalry to pass through. "I still have one more inch movement talisman left," Chen Ping'an revealed to Song Yuxiao in a quiet voice. Song Yuxiao smiled as he said, "You go ahead, I'll watch your back this time. Don't directly charge at the foot soldiers, just retreat to the left-hand side, and we'll return to the villa through the mountains so the cavalry can't pursue us. Otherwise, they'll be a pain to deal with." Chen Ping'an nodded in response, then took a deep breath as he tightened his grip around the scruff of Chu Hao's neck before using his final inch movement talisman. Only now did everyone come to realize how he had managed to abruptly disappear on several previous occasions in the battle. This time he was not completely invisible, especially as Chu Hao was still trailing along behind him. The unconscious general was being blown by the wind, flying in a horizontal position as Chen Ping'an dragged him, much like a streamer floating in the air behind a dancing woman. After the inch movement talisman wore off, Chen Ping'an was revealed again, and he began running through the air as he had done before. However, for some reason as he took his first step, he stumbled a little, and only after that did he begin running through the air in a smooth fashion. Song Yuxiao followed Chen Ping'an, and the two of them fled the battlefield. It didn't take long before the two of them were reduced to tiny black spots on the distant horizon. In the end, they were able to escape into the forest in the distance. At this point, their safety was all but ensured, and a concerned look appeared on Song Yuxiao's face as he recalled Chen Ping'an's initial stumble. "Have you suffered internal injuries?" Chen Ping'an shook his head with a smile as he explained, "I'm fine, it's just that one of my flying swords is acting up." The first time he had flown through the air over Chu Hao's army, he had used 1st and 15th as alternating stepping stones. However, as he attempted the same thing a second time, 1st was no longer willing to cooperate, and it intentionally sidestepped Chen Ping'an's foot, causing him to stumble. After that, it returned to the sword nurturing gourd, but thankfully, 15th was fast enough to keep up with Chen Ping'an's pace on its own. I've heard that in the north there are master martial artists who have successfully reached the martial god tier, and not only are they able to stand in midair as they please, they can even fly just like chi refiners can. Song Yuxiao mused with a hint of longing in his eyes. Chen Ping'an had heard similar stories from Zhu He, and nodded in confirmation as he replied, "That's something that only 8th tier martial artists are capable of. That tier is called the wing formation tier, and it's also known as the far-roaming tier due to the flight ability that one gains at that tier." A perplexed look appeared on Song Yuxiao's face as he asked, "Aren't all tiers above the 6th tier collectively known as the martial god tier?" Chen Ping'an was also rather perplexed to hear this, and shook his head as he replied, "That's not what I've heard. While it's true that spirit refinement commences once one progresses beyond the 6th tier, they're still nowhere near the level where they can be referred to as martial gods. Only those at the 7th tier, the Vajrabhati tier, have the right to be referred to as lesser grandmasters. After that comes the 8th tier, the wing formation tier, then the 9th tier, the mountain summit tier, and finally the 10th tier. We have a 10th tier martial artist in our Greatly Empire, and his name is Song Chongjing. He's the uncle of my former neighbor on Clay Vase Alley, and I had the chance to meet him once. He was really strong, and I could tell that he was a master martial artist just by looking at him." Song Yuxiao was completely flabbergasted, and felt as if he were listening to a fictional story. Upon seeing the look on Song Yuxiao's face, Chen Ping'an decided to refrain from articulating what he was about to say next, which was that the barefoot old man who had taught him his fist technique was also a 10th tier martial artist, and that he was the first 10th tier martial artist to emerge on Eastern Treasured Vile Continent in several centuries. Song Yuxiao quickly took this information in stride as he chuckled. "It appears I'm the epitome of a hillbilly who's seen nothing. No matter. It's fantastic news that there's still so much to be conquered above the 6th tier for martial artists. Otherwise, if it's only the cultivators who get to experience the scenery at the top, then we martial artists would be put to shame." Chen Ping'an nodded vigorously in response, and was thinking to himself that if Song Yuxiao were to pay a visit to the small town, he would surely get along very well with Cui Chan's grandfather. There were some people who didn't see a vast disparity in cultivation base as a reason to not share a drink with someone else at the same table. In the eyes of Qian Ping'an, Song Yuxiao was an extraordinary man, so he was confident that the old sword saint would be respected no matter where he went. After Chu Hao's true qi ran out, his Du armor reverted back to its silver ingot form before falling onto the ground, and Qian Ping'an flicked it up with his foot and put it away. At this point, Chu Hao had already regained consciousness, but he didn't dare to open his eyes, and Qian Ping'an gave him a swift chop to the back of the neck to knock him out again, while Song Yuxiao looked on with an amused smile. In his eyes, Chu Hao was truly blessed with immense fortune to have been captured by a mighty young sword immortal from the Great Li Empire. What happens next? Qian Ping'an asked. Song Yuxiao contemplated the question for a moment, then replied, no matter how desperate those 3,000 cavalry are to save their master, they wouldn't be so foolish as to directly storm Sword Water Villa. It's clear that Fengshan somehow managed to plant some of his people in Chu Hao's army, and the troops are in a state of complete chaos, so none of them will be able to stage a rescue for Chu Hao. I presume they'll return to the city to wait and observe. His expression then darkened slightly as he continued, however, with the demise of Colorful Garment Nation's sword god and the unrest taking place in the Blusher Prefecture, as well as what's currently happening with our Sword Water Villa, I feel like the Academy is about to intervene soon. The Academy? As in Lakeview Academy, one of the 72 academies of Confucianism? Qian Ping'an asked. That's right, Song Yuxiao replied with a forlorn sigh. Over the past 1,000 years, cultivators and mortals have been able to coexist in relative peace and harmony, and that's all thanks to the Academy's supervision. However, on this occasion, our Sword Water Villa could be standing in opposition against the Academy, and that's something that I never thought would happen. If those esteemed figures from the Academy get involved, our villa will most likely become just as disillusioned as the army we just faced, and the villa's reputation could be swept to the ground. Qian Ping'an had some recollection of Lakeview Academy. As far as he was aware, this was an academy that ranked alongside Mr. Chi's Mountain Cliff Academy, and it was also related to that incident with the female ghost in the red wedding dress. On the way back to Yellow Court Nation from Great Sui Nation, Cui Chan had been feeling quite bored, so he had mentioned some of the bewildering background information behind the incident, and as it turned out, it had something to do with a scholar at Lakeview Academy. Finally, there was the noble scholar of Lakeview Academy, Cui Minghuang, who had once entered Jewel's small world as a representative of Confucianism on Eastern Treasured Vile Continent. However, as for why someone like Song Yuxiao, who dared to oppose an entire army on his own, seemed to be so apprehensive toward the academy, that was a question that Qian Ping'an didn't have an answer to. A self-deprecating look appeared on Song Yuxiao's face as he sighed. It's not like we'll just roll over and surrender against the academy, but at the same time we don't have the courage to stand against them. What a predicament! Qian Ping'an was feeling rather perplexed. Song Yuxiao seemed to have gleaned Qian Ping'an's thoughts, and he clasped his hands behind his back as he strolled slowly through the forest. As he did so, he peered at the rays of sunlight filtering through the leaves, which resembled nuggets of gold that had spilled down onto the ground. After a brief silence, a resigned look appeared on his face as he said, "Are you not aware that the words of scholars are considered to be gospel? I once saw a virtuous scholar from Lakeview Academy in person. He was so young, yet the sword god of Colorful Garment Nation went out of his way to welcome the young scholar so that he could learn from the young man. The young virtuous scholar sat in a formal and dignified manner, while the sword god of the Colorful Garment Nation was made to resemble a small child in a classroom sitting across from him, and even though the scholar made no display of his combat prowess, he was giving off an indescribable aura of invincibility." A wry smile appeared on Song Yuxiao's face as he continued, "Even if there were 1,000 of me, it would still make no difference in the face of a single reprimanding line from a scholar of the academy. Then what if the scholars of the academy are wrong? What if even virtuous scholars and noble scholars make mistakes? Who's going to hold them accountable?" Qian Ping'an asked. "The sages above them will be responsible for that," Song Yuxiao replied with a smile. A contemplative look appeared on Qian Ping'an's face, and he continued to drag Chu Hao along by the scruff of his neck, while Chu Hao's trailing feet rustled audibly over the ground. It was common practice to rest and recuperate after a grueling battle. Chu Hao's army no longer posed any threat, and Song Fengshan was looking after the villa, so Song Yuxiao wasn't in a hurry to get back. Instead, he was going to wait for Chu Hao to regain consciousness so that he could ask him some questions. Once a pure martial artist reached a certain cultivation base, a period of rest would be all that was required to return to peak condition, as long as they didn't suffer any substantial injuries. The duration of this period varied from person to person. For those who were at the martial god tier, in actuality the Vajrabhati tier, the wing formation tier, and the mountain summit tier, It was said that they could complete a breathing cycle in the blink of an eye, doing so with such speed and efficiency that it was virtually instantaneous, so there was no weakness to be exploited. If Song Yuxiao had been at one of those 3 tiers, then the green bamboo sword immortal's plan of waiting for him to breathe out before striking would have been impossible to execute. It was also because of this that there had always been a saying in the central region of Eastern Treasured Vile Continent: a martial god was always at their peak up to the moment they met their demise. However, Song Yuxiao had only heard stories about the so-called martial god tier. And while Chen Ping'an was more familiar with those tiers, even he didn't know much more about them. Right at this moment, Song Yuxiao noticed that Chen Ping'an wasn't looking quite right. Theoretically speaking, once a martial artist left the battlefield, their condition should have been steadily recovering, yet Chen Ping'an was still looking quite weary. With that in mind, Song Yuxiao stopped in his tracks and asked, "Be honest with me, have you suffered internal injuries?" Before answering the question, Chen Ping'an first took a glance at Chu Hao. His breathing was slow and even, and didn't appear to have awakened, but Chen Ping'an wasn't fooled. Back when he was exploring the mountains and wilderness with Lu Xianying in his younger days, he would often catch snakes, and all he would have to do was shake a snake around a little to loosen up all of its joints. He did the same thing here with Chu Hao, knocking him out again with a flick of his wrist. Chu Hao thought that he had been putting on an impeccable act, and he let loose an anguished howl internally as he lost consciousness once again. He could only lament his own misfortune at having run into such a callous and unreasonable sword immortal. Only after Chu Hao was knocked out again did Chen Ping'an explain to Song Yuxiao, "I'm not a swordsman, so controlling the 2 flying swords is very taxing on me mentally. Even though they can fight on their own after leaving the sword nurturing gourd, some of my attention is required to support them, acting as a scabbard in a way. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to stay for too long outside of my acupoint or my sword nurturing gourd. On top of that, I also had to use a few inch movement talismans in a short time, and my breath was too rushed, so I'm not feeling too great. Having said that, it's not a big problem, and as long as I don't have to fight again anytime soon, I can slowly recover through my breathing technique." Song Yuxiao was relieved to hear this. Strolling through the shade and sunlight in the forest, the old sword saint was looking very relaxed and carefree, not just because the knot in his heart that had plagued him for years had been untied, but also because he had made a young friend to whom he could entrust his own life. In the process, his faith and hope in the world had been reignited. Even if so many things had changed, there were still things in this world that were worth living for. All of a sudden, a smile appeared on his face as he said, "Chen Ping'an, with a sword nurturing gourd in your possession, you have an advantage over other swordsmen in that you won't have to use up resources to repair your bonded flying swords after each usage. Having said that, I still owe you a great debt. I wasn't expecting Chu Hao to recruit Pinestream Nation's green bamboo sword immortal to help him bring me down. If it wasn't for your help, I would have definitely met my demise back there. So once we return to the villa, I'll give you all of the light snow coins in our villa's possession as repayment. It's not much, we've only managed to save up fewer than 2,000 light snow coins over the years, and Fengshan spent half of it to purchase vast water, so I only have about 800 or 900 light snow coins to give you." Song Yuxiao was getting a little embarrassed as he spoke, and a self-deprecating face appeared on his face as he sighed. "To think that my life would only be worth less than 1,000 light snow coins." Chen Ping'an considered the proposal for a moment, then nodded as he said, "I'll only take 300 coins, Senior Song. There's no need to give all of it to me. I'm sure Song Fengshan will have uses for light snow coins in the future." Inside the pocket treasure that was 15th, there was the batch of snowflake coins that the little boy in Azure had spent to purchase those ordinary snake gall pebbles, and also 8 lesser heat coins that were even more valuable than snowflake coins, so it was already quite a large sum of wealth, and normally Chen Ping'an would have turned down the offer without a second thought. However, under Wei Bo's introduction, Chen Ping'an had personally witnessed the scenes that unfolded in Cloth Wrapper Shop on Oxhorn Mountain, and he was worried that if he didn't have enough money in his possession, then he could miss out on something that caught his eye once he reached the ferry station. Chen Ping'an's decision to accept the offer, but also not fully accept it, was rather surprising to Song Yuxiao, and an amused look appeared on his face as he chuckled. "Do you know what people of the older generation would say to that? They would say that discussions about money would only hurt our brotherly bond. If you see me as a brother and a friend, then don't try to argue this matter any further. Otherwise, we may not even be able to remain as friends anymore." Chen Ping'an shook his head in response. "Owing someone a favor is more painful than owing someone money. At the very least, that's how I feel." Song Yuxiao was much in agreement with this statement, and he nodded in response. "That's a sentiment that I share, and it should be a universal one." A gentle breeze was blowing through the forest, causing the leaves and branches to rustle audibly. Song Yuxiao was concerned about Chen Ping'an's condition, so he wasn't walking very quickly. On top of that, he was feeling quite relaxed, having already achieved his objective of capturing Chu Hao, so he was in the mood to be appreciating the passing scenery. As he did so, he requested Qian Ping'an not to knock out Chu Hao again the next time he woke up, as he had some questions for the general. Qian Ping'an naturally agreed to this request. Having already determined Chu Hao's approximate cultivation base, Qian Ping'an knew that the general posed no threat to him. He didn't want to have to carry Chu Hao on his back, but it was also rather cumbersome to be constantly dragging him around by the scruff of his neck, so in the end, he simply decided to drag Chu Hao along by one leg, much like an old janitor dragging around a broom. The green bamboo sword immortal wasn't worried that Song Yuxiao and Qian Ping'an would come after him, and he was returning to the city along the official road at a leisurely pace. All of a sudden, he turned his gaze to the forest in the distance, and stopped in his tracks before grabbing onto the length of bamboo strapped to his waist. An acquaintance of his slowly emerged from the forest. It was an old man with a very angular face that gave him a rather menacing appearance. The sword strapped to his waist was in a scabbard wrapped in a layer of green threads of unknown material, and it was far longer than the average longsword, so it was very attention-grabbing. The green bamboo sword immortal stepped off the official road and made his way toward the elderly swordsman from ancient Elm Nation, who he had met on several past occasions, and the two of them stopped in unison around 20 meters away from each other. "It's been about 5 or 6 years since we last parted ways by that river, right, Su Lang?" the old swordsman asked with a smile. "What do you want, Lin Gushen? If you have something to say, then hurry up." "I'm not in a very good mood right now," the green bamboo sword immortal said in a cold voice. The old swordsman wasn't bothered by Su Lang's hostile demeanor, and he cut straight to the chase, revealing, "I was entrusted by the Imperial Preceptor with the task of intercepting and killing Qian Ping'an. I faced him in battle once in the past, and he killed both the Scorpion Lady and a Qi refiner who was an Imperial guest elder. Right now, only the master of the case purchasing pagoda and myself are left, but we're not willing to give up just yet. I'm sure both Song Yuxiao and Qian Ping'an would have been worn out somewhat by the battle that just took place, and I was thinking that perhaps we could join forces to hunt those two down together. If we succeed, you can do with Song Yuxiao as you please, while we take case purchasing pagoda back to ancient Elm Nation." Su Lang took a glance at the forest in the distance, then asked, "Will we be able to make it in time? What are our chances of success?" "The owner of the case purchasing pagoda specializes in assassination, and he'll strike first, harassing Song Yuxiao and Qian Ping'an to slow them down. As for what our chances of success are, that's not something that I can say for sure. Even if the three of us join forces, I can't say with confidence how many of us will survive to the end. If you had tried to placate me by telling me that we had great chances, then I would have refused right away," Su Lang said with a smile. "Does that mean you agree?" Lin Gushen asked. Su Lang nodded in response. "You go and help the owner of the case purchasing pagoda. I'll turn back right now to find Chu Hao's deputy and those two Qi refiner guest elders of Watercombing Nation. As long as the two of you can delay Song Yuxiao and Qian Ping'an, I can ensure that our chances of success will be improved." Lin Gushen was a little hesitant to accept this arrangement. Su Lang smiled as he said, "We're only deciding to work together on a spur-of-the-moment basis, so I understand that you don't fully trust me. However, I'm sure you understand how much of a temptation it is for a swordsman of Pine Stream Nation like myself to be able to personally claim the head of Watercombing Nation's old sword saint." A cold smile appeared on Lin Gushen's face as he scoffed. "Are you planning to claim the head of ancient Elm Nation sword paragon as well while you're at it? Wouldn't it be nothing short of ideal if you could reign supreme as the sole dominant force out of all of the swordsmen in the entire region?" Su Lang pinched a stray strand of hair between two of his fingers while tapping the length of green bamboo strapped to his waist with a finger of his other hand, and he declared in a nonchalant fashion, "I'm going to be honest, I've never seen you as a threat." Lin Gushen's eyes narrowed slightly. "What an impudent little rascal you are. The truth is often harsh and difficult to stomach," Su Lang replied with a nonchalant shrug. Lin Gushen was silent for a moment, then said, "In any case, Song Yuxiao and Qian Ping'an are our common enemies, so the owner of the case purchasing pagoda and I will be awaiting your reinforcements. If you fail to follow through, I wouldn't dare to say whether the owner of the case purchasing pagoda would come after you for revenge, but I, for one, will be sure to demand an explanation from your Pine Stream Nation's imperial family." Su Lang merely extended a hand forward in response, gesturing for Lin Gushen go on ahead. With that, Lin Gushen departed, while Su Lang returned to the official road. Along the way, Su Lang suddenly stopped in his tracks as he had spotted a beautiful young woman in a yellow and pink dress, standing in the middle of the road like an immaculate celestial maiden. Su Lang slowly continued onward, while the young woman pulled a secret letter out of her sleeve. The letter was enclosed in a red wax seal. a precautionary measure taken by the sender to prevent the one tasked with delivering the letter from opening it. The young woman smiled as she said, Song Fengshan asked me to pass this letter on to you. He says that there's a proposal in this letter, and that if you agree to it, then just give me a nod. Song Fengshan promises that you'll be the sole sword immortal for the next 60 years in all of the dozen or so nations in the region, and that your position will be unchallenged during that time. After a brief moment of contemplation, Su Lang pulled out a pair of white silken gloves out of his sleeve, then put them on as he beckoned to the young woman and said, Toss the letter to me. The young woman was none other than the mama of the ancient temple, one of the 4 evil spirits, and she had left Sword Water Villa to keep an eye on Song Yuxiao in case of any unforeseen mishaps. But the more important task assigned to her was to personally deliver this letter to Su Lang. As it turned out, the vastly renowned green bamboo sword immortal had imperial blood in his veins, but his bloodline wasn't very pure, so he had no chance of becoming heir to the emperor of Pine Stream Nation. Su Lang carefully removed the wax seal, then opened the envelope, and after quickly scanning over the contents of the letter, a faint smile appeared on his face. With a flick of his wrist, he tore the secret letter to shreds, then removed his gloves and stowed them back up his sleeve as he nodded and said, You can go and report back to Song Fengshan now. I can see that Sword Water Villa is being very sincere, and I'm more than happy to reciprocate this sincerity. Tell Song Fengshan that he'll soon be receiving a piece of good news related to the old sword saint, and that I hope that he can follow through on the promises that he made in this letter. The young woman immediately extended an elegant curtsy, and she smiled as she said, Song Fengshan can be rather cold and unfriendly, but he's still a very reliable and dependable man, and he's even more seasoned and calculating than old demons like us who have lived for centuries. Hence, you can rest assured and place your trust in him. In the near future, you'll be the undisputed ruler of the cultivation world in all of the dozen or so nations in this region, and it'll be a position no less prestigious than emperor of any nation. I certainly hope so, Su Lang replied with a smile. If you ever need someone to warm your bed, just send me a message, and I'll be at your service at any time you wish, the young woman said as she gave Su Lang a seductive look, following which her body disintegrated into a plume of smoke that rose up into the sky and quickly vanished out of sight, leaving behind only a peal of tinkling laughter. Su Lang continued onward while weighing up his options. Should he aim for short-term gains and claim the reward that was virtually already in his grasp? Or should he join forces with Song Fengshan so that he could be elevated to the pinnacle of the cultivation world? Was a bird in the hand truly worth 2 in the bush here? All of a sudden, Su Lang burst into laughter as he recalled a rather amusing proposal on the secret letter. Song Fengshan had promised him that roughly once every decade, they would stage an epic act in which the 2 of them would face off against one another in a battle of the Titans. Song Fengshan was going to inherit the title of Sword Saint of Sword Water Villa, while Su Lang had sole claim over the title of Sword Immortal, and the 2 of them would engage in a so-called battle to the death. In reality, it was nothing more than a ruse. Song Fengshan had even picked out 3 candidate locations for these battles to take place. For the first battle, Song Fengshan would issue a challenge to him, and the battle would take place atop the main hall of Pine Stream Nation's Imperial Palace. In that battle, Su Lang was scripted to emerge with a crushing victory. The second battle would take place atop Sword Water Villa's waterfall, and Song Fengshan would come out slightly on top. The third battle would be waged in the unmarked graveyards of Colorful Garment Nation's Blusher Prefecture, and Su Lang would be the victor. Su Lang found this to be very amusing, so he decided to reciprocate the olive branch extended by Song Fengshan by presenting him with the heads of Ancient Elm Nation's Sword Paragon and the owner of the Case Purchasing Pagoda. It didn't take long before Su Lang spotted Chu Hao's army in the distance, but he was still mulling over all the machinations that Song Fengshan had meticulously woven as he murmured to himself, so young yet already so cunning. In the end, he refrained from returning to Chu Hao's army. Instead, he suddenly veered off the official road and darted into the forest on his own. It was still going to be a 3-on-2 battle, but it was going to be him, Song Yuxiao, and Chen Ping'an up against Lin Gushan and the owner of the Case Purchasing Pagoda. Upon entering the forest, Su Lang intentionally slowed down as he chuckled to himself. What a perilous place this world is. Inside a quiet and unremarkable courtyard in the city, there resided an esteemed guest from the capital. The courtyard wasn't very grand or opulent, but it was very tidy, and all of its furnishings were quite elegant and tasteful. Furthermore, the courtyard was situated in a quiet pocket in what was otherwise quite a busy location, so it was clear that a great deal of thought had been put into its site selection and construction. There was a woman standing in the courtyard, and even though she was already quite advanced in age, she looked after herself very well, and much of her youthful beauty still remained. At first glance, one could easily mistake her for a young woman only around 30 years of age. At this moment, she was bent over slightly, feeding the fish inside a large vat. Inside the vat were around a dozen tiny goldfish, while on the surface of the water were numerous water lilies, and there was an alluring contrast between the green and the gold. Aside from her, the only other person in the courtyard was a physically imposing maidservant with a saber strapped to her waist. However, there were many more people lurking in the shadows on the streets and alleys around the courtyard, including elite soldiers from the military and several formidable martial artists. Some of the most experienced and capable law enforcers of the regional supervisor's manor had arrived in the area well in advance, and that was a clear indication that the woman staying in the courtyard was quite an important figure. However, despite all of these protective measures that were in place, the maidservant in the courtyard, who was as well built as a man, suddenly crumpled to the ground without any warning, while a handsome young man holding a folding fan appeared behind her. His sideburns were drifting slightly in the light breeze produced by his fan, and he cast his gaze toward the elegant woman still feeding the fish in the water vat. Her stunning figure was certainly a sight for sore eyes, and for him it was worth making the trip just for this piece of stunning scenery. The woman stood up straight as she turned in silence to look at the young man, who smiled as he said, "Greetings, madam. We've met before in the capital city." The woman remained calm and collected as she sneered. "Since when did the Han clan of Mount Shaochong dare to oppose a general?" The young man put his folding fan away, then placed his hands over his own face, rubbing it. A moment later, a face that was extremely familiar to the woman was revealed, and his voice had also changed into one that she couldn't have been more familiar with as he asked, "How about now, madam?" Before the woman could scream, Han Yuanshan gently pressed a finger over her lips as he made a hushing motion and said, "Rest assured, madam, I like to claim the hearts of women, but I would never stoop as low as to have my way with a woman by force. However, I'm sure that you'll be willing to surrender your body to me someday, and when that time comes." At this moment, Han Yuanshan had adopted Chu Hao's appearance, and he pointed at the water vat of fish as he concluded, "We'll be able to have as much fun as a pair of fish swimming through the water." In the Blusher prefecture of Colorful Garment Nation, an elderly scholar with a jade pendant hanging from his waist was standing atop the city walls with a grim look on his face. Inside the imperial study in the capital city of Colorful Garment Nation, another elderly scholar was standing with his hands clasped behind his back. He also had a jade pendant hanging from his waist, and was looking out the window in silence, while the Emperor of Colorful Garment Nation was standing beside him in an uneasy fashion, not even daring to sit down. In Ancient Elm Nation, there was yet another elderly scholar with an identical jade pendant hanging from his waist. He was sitting in a crude horse-drawn carriage that he had rented, and the coach driver was a young man constantly complaining about everything. While they were still around 10 kilometers away from Ancient Elm Nation, he was abruptly rooted to the spot. He had very good eyesight, and could see a large army in the distance, accompanied by some important-looking officials dressed in formal attire. There was also a golden-robed man standing beside the official road, and from the looks of it, all of them seemed to be waiting for someone. The scholar inside the carriage set down the book that he was reading, then said to the coach driver, "Take me to the relay station. Rest assured they're waiting for me. In addition to the deposit issued to you earlier, the reward given to you in private by Ancient Elm Nation's Imperial Court will serve as the rest of my payment." The scholar began packing up his bookcase with a smile on his face as he continued, "It's not every day that we get to go out on a trip. Make sure you don't annoy our mountain master anymore once you return to Watercombing Nation." Meanwhile, at Sword Water Villa, the Alliance Leader election ceremony was about to commence. Inside the hall, there were several faces missing from those who had been present during the earlier festivities, but also many important figures from both the Path of Righteousness and the Underworld alike that had just arrived. By this point, most of the significant figures of Watercombing Nation had made their appearance. Song Fengshan was in the main seat, and he wasn't displaying much of a reaction at the sight of these important figures. There were people with all types of different agendas among them, including some who wished to pledge their allegiance to Song Fengshan, some who were eager to see his downfall, some who wished to assess the situation before placing their bets, and also some from the Imperial Court who thought that they would be treated to a good show. Not far away from Song Fengshan sat his wife, whose opulent attire and regal demeanor definitely wouldn't have lost out to any of the imperial concubines in the palace. Of course, Song Fengshan was extremely confident, but there were others present who were just as confident as him. However, neither side could have anticipated that the arrival of an unwelcome guest would completely shatter the plans that they had meticulously put together over the course of many years. There was no report from the porter, nor did any of Sword Water Villa's disciples step in to stop this unwelcome guest. The man simply arrived and declared his own identity, and almost everyone present immediately extended respectful bows, as mandated by Confucian etiquette. The new arrival was a young man in a Confucian robe with a jade pendant hanging from his waist, and he walked with an indescribable gait and rhythm, making his way into the main hall of Swordwater Villa in an unhurried fashion. After stepping into the hall, he took a glance at his surroundings, then declared once again, "Greetings, everyone. I am Virtuous Scholar Zhou of Lakeview Academy." Almost everyone in the hall instantly rose to their feet to extend respectful bows toward the young virtuous scholar. The young man returned their salute, then took a few steps forward before casting his gaze toward Song Fengshan, who was looking back at him with a dark expression. His wife gently laid a hand onto his arm before giving him a subtle look, indicating for him to proceed with caution. "Is Han Yuanshan of Mount Xiaocheng's Han clan here at the villa?" Zhou asked in a calm voice. Song Fengshan suppressed the fury in his heart as he put on a fake smile and replied, "I'm afraid you've missed him. He was here at the villa just yesterday, but he's no longer here today. He told me that he was suddenly struck by a bout of wanderlust and wanted to see what sights and scenes Watercombing Nation had to offer. May I ask what business you have with him, esteemed virtuous scholar? If it's nothing urgent, I would be more than happy to pass on a message for you." Zhou smiled as he replied, "Han Yuanshan is a top scholar of Watercombing Nation's imperial court and a follower of Confucianism, yet he's cultivating demonic arts and harbors sinister intentions to spoil the welfare of a nation. I've been tasked with taking him to Lakeview Academy to be punished, and as for what his punishment is going to be, that will be decided once he gets there. Song Fengshan, here is a word of advice for you from me, not as a virtuous scholar of the academy, but simply as Zhou. It's still not too late to turn back. Don't run your horse off the cliff, then only come to regret your actions as you fall." Song Fengshan placed his elbow on the armrest of his chair, then rested his chin on the palm of his hand as he cocked his head to the side, sizing up Zhou with an amused smile on his face. It was said that whenever these noble scholars left the academy to carry out official duties, they would always be carrying these jade pendants bestowed upon them by the sage of the academy. Those jade pendants recorded their experiences and conduct, and was supposed to be a measure put in place to assure others of their integrity and cleanliness of conduct. The jade pendants were the simplest of jade amulets meant to bring safety and prosperity, but they had different text engraved upon them depending on the noble or virtuous scholars they had been assigned to. The inscriptions were always extremely profound, often containing expectations and advice that the sage of the academy had for these scholars. In a display of extreme rudeness, Song Fengshan showed no intention of replying, so his wife naturally interjected to defuse the situation, standing and extending a curtsy toward Zhou as she smiled and said, "If Han Yuanshan really has committed such heinous crimes, then our Swordwater Villa will be sure to perform its duty and assist the academy in apprehending him." Zhou cast his gaze toward the woman, then scoffed in a cold voice. "You're only able to stand here and speak in such a righteous manner because your bridge of immortality was severed long ago. Otherwise, you won't be in a much better position than Han Yuanshan right now. Those who pursue the demonic arts have no place in this world, and any demonic practitioners who dare to disrupt the welfare of nations will have our academy to answer to." Song Fengshan sat bolt upright as he glowered intently at Zhou. "Have a bit more respect when you speak to my wife. Fengshan," the young woman hurriedly called out as she turned to him with an urgent expression, and Song Fengshan took a glance at her before heaving an internal sigh and falling silent again. All of a sudden Do Yang, the self-proclaimed leader of the demonic orthodoxy, took a large swig of wine, then slammed his cup heavily onto the table with an audible sneer. Zhou turned to Do Yang as he declared, "Once I've completed the official duties assigned to me by the academy, I'll be removing this jade pendant from my waist. I hope you still have the courage to sneer at me then." Do Yang took a derisive glance at Zhou out of the corner of this eye, then chuckled, "Others may fear Lakeview Academy, and I do as well, but I'm nowhere near as afraid as the others as I'm aware of your academy's rules. I know the barriers to entry for virtuous scholars, as well as the bottlenecks that prevent them from advancing beyond that status, and I know just how big the gap is between virtuous scholars and noble scholars. So I suggest you don't try to intimidate me with empty threats. Even if you remove your jade pendant, I'll still fear your academy, and I wouldn't dare to fight you all out. But if you were to renounce your status as a virtuous scholar of the academy altogether and face me as a man, then pardon my language, but I would beat the living shit out of you." This was an extremely bold declaration from Do Yang, but also one that was quite cathartic for everyone present. Even though many of the righteous individuals present resented him fiercely for his past actions, they still couldn't help but feel a sense of admiration toward him for his courage to be so blunt and forthright even in the face of a virtuous scholar of Lakeview Academy. The fact that Watercombing Nation had such a valiant spearhead of the demonic orthodoxy surely placed it above the likes of Colorful Garment Nation and Ancient Elm Nation. A faint smile appeared on Zhouju's face, and he lowered his head as he began to murmuring to his jade pendant. Do you hear that, teacher? How can I just stomach these blatant insults without retaliation? I understand that I have to refrain from beating up those virtuous scholars of our academy, but I'm not in the academy right now. Do I still have to be so tolerant of a demonic chi refiner? I know you definitely tell me to be more tolerant, and that if I could rein in my temper, then I would be reinstated as a noble scholar, but I just can't do it. What was that? What did you say, teacher? Hello, can you hear me? It looks like there's something wrong with this jade pendant of mine. You really have to reprimand the jade pendant makers at our academy, so they do a better job, teacher. In the meantime, I'll speak to you later. Make sure to assign me a new jade pendant once I return to the academy, teacher. From everyone else's perspective, it was as if Zhouju had suddenly gone insane, grabbing onto the jade pendant hanging from his waist and shaking it around vigorously while pretending that it was vibrating on its own. In the end, he made a hand seal, and a gentle breeze blew toward him, forming a cocoon around the jade pendant. Only then did he remove the jade pendant from his waist with a smile before stowing it up his sleeve. In the meantime, the young woman hurriedly made her way over to Song Fengshan's side, then said with a wry smile, I've managed to recall who this is, Fengshan. He's one of the direct disciples of the sage of the academy. Among all of the sage's direct disciples, he's the youngest and has the shortest temper. As for his powers, if he's not ranked at the top, then he's at least the second-ranked disciple. At just 30 years of age, he became a noble scholar, and that had created a massive stir at the time. He's regarded as the second brightest young prospect of the academy, behind only Cui Minghuang, so he's always been closely protected by Lakeview Academy. According to our sources, his name is Zhou Yuran and not Zhouju, and that's why I wasn't able to recall who he was right away. Do Yang gulped nervously as a sense of foreboding welled up in his heart. He didn't know that Zhouju was Zhou Yuran. Hearing Zhouju mutter to himself about beating up virtuous scholars and a reinstatement to the status of noble scholar had alerted him to the fact that this was not someone to be messed with. Hence, he immediately rose to his feet and was about to apologize. There was no shame in conceding inferiority to a noble scholar of Confucianism. However, Zhouju didn't give him a chance to apologize. He stabbed a finger in Do Yang's direction as he smiled and declared, Our Confucian predecessors once spoke of a valley filled with broken rocks and gusts of wind fierce enough to have those broken rocks swirling around like weightless leaves. It may sound implausible, but I'll demonstrate that all of you right now. All of a sudden, fierce astral winds swept through the air in a radius of about 3 meters around Do Yang, and they were as ferocious as a tornado as they revolved around Do Yang in a frenzy. After the astral winds subsided, all that remained of Do Yang was a bare skeleton. Zhouju didn't even bother to take a glance at Do Yang's skeletal remains as he turned to Song Fengshan and said, I'm sure you've come to realize that I was actually speaking to your wife with plenty of respect just now. Song Fengshan was so furious that veins were bulging on the back of his hand, but his wife was holding him down with a firm grip and a smile on her face. She replied, Of course. We are extremely grateful for your kindness, esteemed virtuous scholar. Zhouju smiled as he said, Seeing as Han Yuanshan isn't present, I won't interrupt your ceremony any longer. I'll go look for him, you can continue as you please. With that, Zhouju turned and departed in a casual and graceful fashion. Right as he emerged from the entrance of the villa, a duo consisting of a young boy and an old man just so happened to be returning. Both of them had blood stains all over their clothes, indicating that they had just endured some tough battles. None of them stopped or said anything, and they passed each other by right as they were striding over the doorstep. Zhouju immediately began to scrutinize Qian Pingyan intently, and the latter found that to be rather strange, so he returned Zhouju's gaze and their eyes met. Even after Qian Pingyan had already made his way into the main hall, and their eye contact was broken, Zhouju was still staring intently at Qian Pingyan with an unblinking gaze. And the wake of Zhouyu's departure, morale in the villa had plummeted to rock bottom, but the arrival of Song Yuxiao lifted everyone's spirits slightly. After all, Lakeview Academy was very far away, and with the departure of Zhouju, there was nothing left for everyone to worry about for the time being. On top of that, the academy hadn't brought any substantial accusations toward Sword Water Villa, which ensured that the villa would be escaping punishment for the foreseeable future. Furthermore, so long as Song Yuxiao remained alive, Song Fengshan's status as the alliance leader would remain unchallenged, even if Song Yuxiao didn't constantly remain in the villa. All of a sudden, Song Yuxiao swung around and took a few steps to the side, seemingly intentionally positioning himself in front of Qian Pingyan in a protective manner. He then strode straight back out of the villa while smoothing down his robes. As he exited, he extended a slight bow and cupped his fist in a salute in Zhouju's direction. Only then did everyone in the main hall discover that an elderly man in a Confucian robe had appeared in the sky outside of the villa. What was most remarkable about the old man was that he was standing at around 10 meters tall, and there was an ethereal quality about him. A sage had arrived at the villa in person. Zhouju had sensed the arrival of the elderly sage an instant before Song Yuxiao, and he hurriedly looked away from Qian Ping'an, then rustled his sleeve slightly to remove the cocoon of wind that he had conjured up around his jade pendant. As a result, the jade pendant was revealed. As it turned out, the words "curb your temper" were engraved upon it. After that, he hung the jade pendant from his waist again, and right as Song Yuxiao was extending his salute, he also extended a deep bow as he greeted. This humble student pays his respects to his teacher. The old man resembled a giant deity statue, the type that was worshipped in temples, and he looked down upon his disciple in an expressionless manner as he declared, "I'll assign someone else to take care of Han Yuanshan. You return to the academy right away." Zhouju heaved a faint sigh, then stood up straight again with a sullen expression as he asked, "Is there any chance I can convince you to change your mind, teacher?" "No," the sage replied in a direct and straightforward manner. "Fine," Zhouju sighed with a resigned expression. The sage cast his gaze towards Song Yuxiao, then cupped his fist to return the salute. He then clasped his hands behind his back with a smile and said, "I can see a breakthrough is imminent for you, Villa Master Song. I must offer you my congratulations in advance. I've heard that whenever you go out to travel, you always make it a point to visit the Confucian temples in the areas that you pass through, and that's truly commendable. If you ever get some spare time, you can come to our academy to cultivate for some time after you make your breakthrough, so you can consolidate your Vajrabadi to your cultivation base." Song Yuxiao's admiration for the elderly sage grew even further upon hearing this, and he maintained his cupped fist posture as he said, "Thank you, esteemed sage." Lakeview Academy was a vast distance away from Sword Water Villa, yet the elderly mountain master had somehow managed to make it here in the blink of an eye. It was as if any distance for him could be covered with just a single step, hinting at his unfathomable power. A smile appeared on the elderly sage's face, and due to the fact that he was hovering in midair and possessed an enormous stature, everyone inside the main hall of the villa was able to see him in his full glory. He took a long glance at Qian Ping'an, and a series of mixed emotions flashed through his eyes, including acknowledgement and approval, a hint of melancholy and some reminiscence. In the end, he looked away without saying anything, then turned back to Zhouju as he warned, "Do not even try to delay your trip. Return to the academy as soon as possible. I have another important duty to assign to you once you get back." Zhouju's eyes immediately lit up upon hearing this. Is it something to do with the north? The elderly sage paid no heed to Zhouju, as he didn't want to discuss such confidential matters in front of outsiders. Instead, he turned to all of the people gathered in the main hall of the villa as he declared with a smile, "There are many paths that one can pursue to reach the great Tao, and practicing martial arts is also a form of self-cultivation. If you can glean the wonders of the heavenly Tao, then that'll reciprocate your martial Tao foundation. I hope that all of you will continue to walk the path of righteousness, and our Lakeview Academy is open to all of you at any time to come and further your cultivation." Despite his lofty status, the sage didn't display any haughtiness or arrogance, and he spoke in a tone as warm and comforting as spring rain, striking everyone with a sense of tranquility. This was the disposition of a true sage, and a hint of genuine admiration instantly welled up in the hearts of everyone in the hall. All of the important figures in the hall had already risen to their feet, and regardless of their background or allegiance, all of them extended a collective respectful bow toward the esteemed sage. As opposed to the respect that they had displayed toward Zhouju, which was born out of fear, this gesture of respect was far more genuine and heartfelt. Shortly thereafter, the elderly mountain master vanished into thin air, leaving behind only a few rays of rippling golden light. Prior to his departure, the sage took one final glance at Qian Ping'an with a myriad of emotions in his eyes. It seemed that Qi Jingchan of Mountain Cliff Academy really had chosen this young boy to serve as the guardian of his direct disciples. There were very few people in Lakeview Academy aware of this, and even for the elderly sage, he was only able to glean some things after seeing Qian Ping'an for himself. At the same time he cautioned, "Yuan, regardless of what you see in that young boy, do not do or say anything reckless. Make sure to be prudent with your words and actions at all times." Zhouju smiled as he replied, "Rest assured, teacher. He may not be all that remarkable right now, but I know better than to judge him as he currently is." The sage had already departed, and only then did Zhouju notice that the jade pendant hanging from his waist had disappeared, having been taken by his teacher. He continued to make his way out of the hall, and only after he had emerged from the entrance of Sword Water Villa did he turn back with a smile as he mused to himself, "My eyes have truly been opened." Even though he was only a virtuous scholar of Lakeview Academy for now, even someone like Cui Minghuang, who was a vastly renowned noble scholar on Eastern Treasured Vile Continent, didn't dare to take him lightly at all. This wasn't just because he possessed very formidable Confucian powers, nor was it only because he had once been a noble person, only to be demoted back to a virtuous scholar due to past transgressions. Instead, it was because he was able to see some things that even his teacher couldn't, and due to his unique and exceptional talents, even the sage of the 3 Confucian schools had personally instructed the mountain master of Lakeview Academy to be meticulous and diligent in his guidance of Zhou so that the young prodigy didn't stray down the wrong path. In the eyes of Zhou, all of the people of the world were truly diverse and varied. All cultivators, particularly those who followed the teachings of Confucianism, liked to take some forms of energy, essence, and spirit that possessed special meaning and visualize them as certain strange phenomena, such as a series of miniature people the size of grains of rice. Zhou could see all of these miniature figures on the bodies or inside the acupoints of others. For example, a virtuous scholar of the academy who appeared to be thriving and full of vitality on the outside could have a miniature figure that was hobbled and hunched over, as if it were bearing the weight of a mountain on its back. A scholar who was renowned for their strict and meticulous demeanor could have a beautiful celestial maiden flying around near his head. An academic scholar with a boring and dogmatic personality could have a little swordsman whizzing around in their body between their acupoints without a care in the world. When it came to the virtuous scholar that Zhou had beaten, he was constantly virtue signaling and was renowned in the academy for his rigorous attitude and exceptional writing talent. However, when Zhou gazed upon that virtuous scholar's writings, he saw that the pages were filled with fluttering butterflies and romantic bees, as well as a honey-coated sword that was constantly whizzing around in a chaotic and directionless manner. This was the type of person that Zhou detested the most, but out of respect for his teacher, he suppressed his own temper time and time again. However, he finally reached a breaking point during an incident not long after Mountain Cliff Academy was stripped of its title as one of the 72 Confucian academies. At the time, word had only just begun to spread that Qi Jingchun had met his demise, and that Mountain Cliff Academy was moving from the Great Li Empire to Great Sui Nation. That virtuous scholar saw this as the perfect opportunity to strike, and he vehemently denounced Qi Jingchun's teachings, trying to appeal to certain esteemed Confucian figures who espoused the same negative views of Qi Jingchun. In doing so, he was hoping to earn the approval of those esteemed figures to aid in his promotion to become a noble scholar. Zhou's views on Qi Jingchun were quite neutral, but he truly detested that pretentious and sycophantic virtuous scholar from the bottom of his heart, particularly as he was only speaking out against Qi Jingchun now that he was dead. In the end, Zhou gave the virtuous scholar such a brutal beating that he was too embarrassed to show himself in public for half a year. In Cui Minghuang, Zhou saw a vast territory with borders that stretched far and wide, but it was severely ravaged and war-torn. There was not a single miniature figure to be seen in his heart. As for Cui Minghuang himself, despite the flair that he possessed and how vastly renowned he was, his true form was a simple and honest old farmer who tended diligently to his fields. Zhou had always possessed this strange ability from birth, and he also had exceptional memory and writing ability. At 9 years of age, he entered the academy in secret, and under the teachings of the academy's sage, he was able to become a virtuous scholar at just 14 years of age. After that, he continued to stay in a study room that had been personally constructed for him by his teacher, and he kept a very low profile, only ever meeting his senior brothers and sisters. After becoming a noble scholar at 20 years of age, he was appraised by a ceremonial artifact in a Confucian temple, which deemed him to possess the potential to become a righteous figure, one that would rank alongside the likes of Cui Minghuang. As Zhou made his way down the road that led from Sword Water Villa to the town, he suddenly sighed to himself, "I can't help but feel a sense of inferiority." All of a sudden, a figure appeared beside Zhou out of thin air, and he asked in a gentle voice, "Did you see something worthy of interest, Yuan?" Zhou smiled as he said, "Can you please not scare me like that, my good teacher? What if you give me such a massive fright someday that my brain stops working and I turn into an idiot? You'll be kicking yourself then." The mountain master of the academy paid no heed to Zhou's complaints as he walked along in silence. Zhou smiled as he continued, "You know what? I'm not going to tell you this time, teacher. Your curiosity will never be satisfied, and there's nothing you can do about it." The elderly sage burst into laughter. "Fine. I'll just have to beat you once you get back to the academy." Only then did the elderly mountain master truly depart, while Zhou continued to think back to what he had seen with an amazed look on his face. He possessed a scholarly core that had clearly been given to him by someone else, yet it coexisted in perfect harmony with his soul without either one rejecting the other. Hence, despite his young age, he already possessed the makings of a noble person. He walked with a gentle breeze blowing through his sleeves, and atop his shoulders was a meadow filled with sunflowers and golden orioles, presenting a breathtaking sight to behold. There was a little person seated on the meadow, burping loudly between swigs of wine from his red gourd. There was a little person in a pair of straw sandals, practicing standing meditation by a river, or walking meditation through the mountains. There was a little person with his hair arranged into braids, flipping through the pages of a book. It seemed that the reading was not progressing very smoothly, and the little person's brows were tightly furrowed as he scratched his own head in befuddlement. There was also a little person seated with his legs crossed, counting money with a wide smile on his face. Occasionally, he would pick up a coin and bite down onto it to verify its authenticity, or polish it with his sleeve to give it a bright gleam. There was a little person glowing radiantly with treasured light, running around everywhere while handing things off to others, as if he were constantly giving away the possessions that he treasured the most. He had so many diverse and wonderful ideas, as well as countless deep-rooted desires, yet his heart was as pure could be. It was incredible to think that such a strange boy could exist in this world. Zhou Ju's smile faded as he heaved a faint sigh. While it was true that he was in awe and admiration of what he had seen in Qian Ping'an, he didn't want to become like Qian Ping'an at all. In his eyes, living like that had to be very tiresome. Having said that, it would be great if he could become true friends with someone like that. All of a sudden, a thought occurred to Zhou Ju, and he abruptly sprang up from the ground and rose up into the sky. Watercombing Nation was laid out beneath him, and through the gaps in the clouds, he could see the undulating mountain ranges down below. He murmured to himself, "Now that I've seen the Taoist heavenly lord of complete Reed continent, perhaps I should heed that person's advice and pick a larger blessed land to visit as a transcendent immortal. Otherwise, it feels like I'm going to remain stuck at this bottleneck in my cultivation for the rest of eternity." Qian Ping'an was naturally oblivious to the fact that Zhou Ju had already gleaned so many of his secrets thanks to that unique ability of his. For the people of Watercombing Nation, a visit from a sage of Lakeview Academy was an extremely rare occurrence, one that may not occur even once in a generation. However, Qian Ping'an wasn't all that astonished. He had seen far too many incredible things back in Jewel Small World and during his subsequent trip to Great Sway Nation. Despite his young age, he had witnessed things that the people of Watercombing Nation couldn't even imagine in their wildest dreams, not least of which was the mountain god of Tassel Mountain, whom he had seen in the scroll of the scholarly sage and even attacked with his own sword. Qian Ping'an didn't linger for too long in the main hall of the villa. This was because Song Yuxiao had promptly departed after making a declaration, one that had created a massive stir among everyone present. "The army sent by the imperial court to bring down our villa has already retreated." The Mama of the ancient temple had actually returned to the villa alongside Qian Ping'an and Song Yuxiao, but she didn't dare to face a Confucian sage, so she had observed everything that had just taken place from the shadows. Fortunately for her, neither the sage nor Zhou Ju paid any heed to her, and she was feeling extremely relieved.